Welcome to the September 18 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you are able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Kailasopady.
Here.
Councilmember Frenzel.
Here.
Councilmember Westfall. Here. Councilmember Lum.
Here.
Councilmember Grand.
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Here.
Mayor Taylor.
Here.
Councilmember Eaton.
Here.
Councilmember Crapel.
Here.
Councilmember Warpowski.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Present.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda, moved by Councilmember Warpowski, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. Do we have communications today from our city administrator?
Yes, Mayor, we do. I'd like to start with an A2B safe message, and that is the new school year and football season are well underway. The most important part of school safety and game day traffic is you and your awareness. Please bear in mind that the morning hours are now darker as we approach fall, and I encourage you to drive gently and with awareness that students are not always aware of your presence, so be on the lookout and always be safe. I also want to share something from our Gov Delivery network, and it reads, today the City of Ann Arbor released the environmental assessment for the Ann Arbor Station project. The assessment is available for review at a2gov.org/Ann Arbor Station. Physical copies will be available for review beginning tomorrow morning, one at the city clerk's office and one located on the second floor, which is located on the second floor, and one at the reference desk at the Ann Arbor District Library's downtown branch located at 343 South 5th Avenue. I'd also like to address some things that are attached to the agenda for this evening. One is a memorandum on solid waste recycling program area update. I want to share that with the public. There's also a memorandum regarding suicide prevention and parking structures that's related to an agenda this evening. That memorandum is from Susan Foley at the DDA. And also there is an update on the 2018 Huron River Watershed Community Calendar, which the hard copy was mailed out to Ann Arbor residents. I know I got mine through the mail. So that's something that addresses water quality and watershed issues. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. We now have a series of introductions. If folks related to the Constitution Week proclamation would meet me at the front, we'll have our series of introductions. Thank you very much. Hi. That's all. So it's one of the pleasures of being mayor and having a city that we participate in items of national importance, of national recognition. And one of the exciting times every year is the recognition of Constitution Week, something so deeply important to us all. And so I'd like to read it right now. Whereas September 17, 2017 marks the 230th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention. And whereas it is fitting and proper to officially recognize this magnificent document and the anniversary of its creation. And whereas it is fitting and proper to encourage, support, and recognize the patriotic celebrations which will commemorate the occasion. And whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuing of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States of America designating September 17 through 23rd as Constitution Week. Now, therefore, I, Christopher Taylor, Mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan, do hereby proclaim September 17 through 23rd, 2017 as Constitution Week and urge all citizens to take note of the observance.
Thank
So
you so
thank you very much.
Shall I make my comments?
Please,
now?
absolutely.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Thank you, council members. By way of introduction, I'm Sharon Clark. With me is Martha Ballin. We are both longtime residents of Ann Arbor, and we're both members of DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. This week, we Americans celebrate the Constitution, as well we should. It's a remarkable document. It's brief, but it has provided an enduring framework for our government. It's comprised of only 7 articles, 4 handwritten pages, and it has been amended only 27 times in 230 years. Just to remind us all how this came about, in May of 1787, 55 delegates from 12 states, not 13, Rhode Island passed on participating, came to Philadelphia. It was in the middle of the summer, but they nevertheless decided to have their proceedings in strict secrecy, so all windows and doors were closed. During the summer, they debated, they discussed, they argued. Some of the important issues they tackled were small states versus large states, North versus South, the structure and powers of the 3 branches of government, and how the citizenry would be represented in Congress. They reviewed the first draft of a constitution in late July. Then in August, more deliberations, more debate, which continued into September. And on September 17th, they had a final draft to review. Despite some of the misgivings of some of the delegates, 40 delegates from the 12 states did eventually sign the Constitution. And as we know, it was then ratified in 1788. Now, for 168 years after that, there was no real commemoration of the Constitution until in 1955, the Daughters of the American Revolution petitioned Congress for a day of commemoration and a week of commemoration. Congress passed the law. President Eisenhower signed it into law in 1956. And since that time, we have, our group, DAR, has always encouraged the public to read the Constitution, to study it, and to celebrate it. So I thank you tonight for being here to celebrate the Constitution and to commemorate it with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there representatives here this evening with respect to celebrating Recovery Month? Excellent. Good to see you again.
You too, thank you.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
You too. So, there are so many different folks throughout the city and so many different people who have struggles and triumphs that many of us are as yet regrettably unaware. And so one of the pleasures of commemoration such as today is to observe those struggles, observe those triumphs, and raise awareness in the hopes that people who have similar struggles would also be able to find their footing and recover as best they can. And so it is my pleasure and honor to celebrate September as National Recovery Month. Whereas addiction is a major national public health issue affecting those who suffer, their families, loved ones, and their communities. And whereas recovery is a reality for millions of resilient Americans whose lives have been transformed as a result. The 2013 Life and Recovery Study concluded that the dramatic effects associated with recovery affected all areas of life, including a tenfold decrease in involvement with the criminal justice system and the costly emergency room department visits, and a 50% increase in participation in family activities and in paying taxes. And whereas recovery from addiction flourishes in supportive, recovery-friendly communities, and whereas Ann Arbor is a recovery-friendly community that is home to a vibrant, diverse, and thriving recovery community, a model recovery-oriented system of care, many recovery-friendly employers, a collegiate recovery program, and many dedicated professionals who help people initiate and maintain their recoveries. And whereas proclaiming 2017 September as a recovery month serves to applaud those who are in recovery, their families, loved ones, and the community that supports them, providing hope to those who still suffer, and affirming our shared belief in redemption and second chances. Now, therefore, I, Christopher Taylor, Mayor of Ann Arbor, Michigan, do hereby proclaim the month of September 2017 as Recovery Month and invite residents of Ann Arbor to support those in recovery and the programs and services designed to help those in need.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council. My name is Matt Statman. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm also the program manager of the Collegiate Recovery Program at the University of Michigan. I really like that, what that says about what happens for people in recovery. I'm a person who grew up in Ann Arbor. I went to Angel School, Tappan, Slauson, Community, and Pioneer. And I also was in the Washtenaw County Jail more than a few times, and I was under the care of the Michigan Department of Corrections when I was 18 years old for a drug-related offense. And now, and before I got into recovery, I was really a taker. And since I've been in recovery, I've managed to get a couple degrees from local universities, and I own a home, I pay taxes, I work really hard to help other people, and my story is not at all unique. There are people in recovery all over the place in Ann Arbor. I can't walk down the street without seeing several of them, but we're kind of an invisible population, and it's important that people who are in recovery, who are in a position to be able to stand up and say, I'm in recovery, do so, because it brings hope to those who are still suffering. Again, I want to thank you, and I'm going to pass the mic to Ashton so she can say something really briefly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, for inviting Matt and I back, for recognizing Recovery Month again, and for all your hard work in helping to make Ann Arbor a recovery-friendly community. My name is Ashton Marr. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and for me that means I haven't had a drink or a drug in over 4 years. Recovery has given me a truly amazing life that I never thought possible. I've been able to go back to school to work toward my bachelor's in social work, and I'm currently program manager for the Washtenaw Recovery Advocacy Project through Home of New Vision, which advocates for those with substance use disorders on local, state, and federal levels. And I don't do any of it alone. I have our amazing recovery community to thank for their kindness and support. Facing Addiction, a national advocacy organization, estimates that as many as 1/3 of all American households are affected by this chronic health disorder. More than 50,000 Americans of all ages, races, and socioeconomic backgrounds died of drug overdoses last year. Addiction is a disease that does not discriminate. We continue to lose friends and loved ones to this devastating disease, even in Washtenaw County. This is not a problem of the others. The entire community is adversely affected by addiction. However, the good news is that the entire community is also the solution. When people like me who have substance use disorders get access to the support and resources that we need, we can and do recover. There are 23 million Americans in long-term recovery. There are no hopeless cases. We are so fortunate in Ann Arbor to have law enforcement, behavioral and mental health specialists, addiction treatment providers, medical personnel, the faith-based community, and many others coming together to work towards solutions to the overdose epidemic. By continuing to work together, we can and will save lives. We must continue to spread a message of hope for recovery. We must continue to rally together to reduce the stigma surrounding addiction so that people feel comfortable asking for the help they so desperately need. Together, we can make a difference. So thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. It's an honor to participate in this incredible moment.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to introduce from the Ann Arbor Arts Center, Megan Winkle, and from Toyota R&D, Purina Ramaswamy. Please come on up.
Hello, I'm Megan Winkle. I'm the gallery director at the Ann Arbor Arts Center. I'm here to introduce you to the new City Gallery, which is on the wall behind me here. The Ann Arbor Arts Center and the city have partnered together for the Ann Arbor Arts Center to present 7 distinct exhibitions over a period of 1 year within the council chambers. Each will feature local artists and will last 7 to 8 weeks, each with a different theme. The inaugural exhibition features selections from the current exhibition at the Ann Arbor Art Center called In Transit. In Transit is a partnership between the Art Center, Washtenaw Community College, and The Ride, all driven by Toyota Research and Development in Ann Arbor. The artwork is photography by current and alumni students of WCC, curated by WCC faculty. The show focuses on highlighting public transit in our area through pop-up exhibits that demonstrate the reach and routes of the ride.
All right. My name is Pravina Ramasamy. I'm from Toyota R&D here in Ann Arbor, and I do community relations for the organization. Toyota's R&D has been involved in the city been in the city for 40 years. It's our 40th anniversary, and we're proud to continue our community efforts with this $30,000 grant to the Ann Arbor Art Center, who will be supporting these collaborative efforts with WCC, the Ride, through art and mobility, so access to mobility. With that, we will be giving over 1,000 transit passes to nonprofits in the area, including WCC, their scholarship fund for anyone who is in need of transportation throughout the city.
So the Ann Arbor residents, if they're riding public transportation on the Ride, they'll see artwork on all 100 buses in the fleet, as well as in pop-up locations in Ypsilanti and in Scioto Township, in addition to the city gallery here. For more information, you can visit annarborartcenter.org. And I'd just like to say thank you to Mayor Taylor and to all of the council members for this opportunity for the Art Center to present artwork by some of our amazing local artists.
If Firefighter McAllister, Lieutenant Bruck, and Captain Budd would come on up, please. Well, thank you very much. You know, we are accustomed here at council chambers to honor residents who have gone over and above the call of duty with respect to their community. But it is a double pleasure to hear this evening honor members of Ann Arbor's bravest who have gone over and above the call of duty in their service to our community to provide service to the communities affected by Hurricane Irma. And so it is my delight and pleasure to provide this, a small token of appreciation from the city, which is a communication for me, as well as the city administrator's service challenge coin. First to firefighter Bryce McAllister. Thank you very much. Same to Lieutenant Buck. Brock, my apologies. Thank you very much. And finally to Captain Budd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Again, it's a tremendous honor to have you represent the city of Ann Arbor in Florida. And, you know, I'm sure that members who are assembled and members of the public who are watching will be interested to hear a very brief bit about what it is that you all have done down there.
All right, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Mayor, thank you, Council, thank you to the city, and thank you for the department for allowing us to be a part of this team and allow us to go on to travel down to Florida. As you've seen in the newspaper and in the news, there's 45 members that left, that are Michigan Task Force 1, that we left last Sunday and headed down to Jacksonville, Florida. Of those 45 members are comprised of 22 different fire departments, plus civilian engineers, machine operators, and so on. We traveled down to Jacksonville. It took us 2 days to get down there, and we staged in a huge parking lot and slept on cots for the night. And we were with Nashville and Tennessee task force teams, plus I believe some National Guard were there. Unfortunately, the storm didn't take the track that it was supposed to do, and we got our marching orders to return home coming later that afternoon. If the storm had been as severe as they predicted, we would have been put to work right away. So the damage in Jacksonville wasn't as severe as it was down in the Keys and stuff. So then we made the 2.5 day trek back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. We now come to public commentary reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by communicating with the city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. Finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker today is Erica Briggs.
Hi, my name is Erica Briggs. I'm speaking as Vice Chair of the Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition, and I'm here to talk on 2 topics tonight. The first is Pauline Boulevard, and the second is our Crosswalk Ordinance. So, thanks to the communications of the Transportation Commission, it's come to our awareness that the city has plans to replace the water mains and resurface Pauline from East Stadium to 7th, which is great. It's greatly needed. But we're concerned that the plan that's been put forward by city staff is inconsistent with recommendations of the city's non-motorized transportation plan. So it doesn't extend the bike lanes along this corridor as was recommended in the plan, and there's been some alterations to how the crosswalks are manifest along this corridor. So we're bringing this to your attention for a couple of reasons. The first is that we strongly support the non-motorized transportation plan, and we believe the city should be following it. So we want to see the plan that city staff presents at, I think there's a public meeting coming up in October, that should be consistent with the plan's recommendations. And secondly, we're on a kind of a broader message. We think that this may reflect a more systemic issue. It's unclear to us why the city would be not following the non-motorized transportation plan, not furthering, putting forth a project that doesn't extend our non-motorized network, and that doesn't have a complete streets, it doesn't follow that. So we just wanted the city staff and council to kind of be aware of that and to look into it more. And then with regards to the city's pedestrian crosswalk ordinance, as you know, we strongly support the ordinance, but it has resurfaced as a point of discussion in this council chamber, and we want to be here to address some of the recent criticisms that we've heard. We continue to hear, we've heard recently that our current pedestrian ordinance makes Ann Arbor less safe for pedestrians, particularly children. And most recently that we heard that it was a political stunt intended to make Ann Arbor look more pedestrian friendly, but it didn't really accomplish anything. So this one's particularly outrageous. We'd like to just remind you of why council actually changed the ordinance back in 2010, for those of you who weren't here. It was because our previous language was unenforceable. The previous language ordinance required a pedestrian to step into the crosswalk in front of a car to trigger a violation. Because most of us preferred not to do that, what it meant was that most of us who were able-bodied would kind of dash across the street when there were gaps. But that wasn't feasible for somebody who was in a wheelchair. It is not something we recommend that's safe for children to do. That's why council unanimously voted to change our ordinance, to make something that was a tool that our police department could use. So these new RRFBs that we've been putting around the community that are wonderful, just know that if we chose to repeal our ordinance, the police wouldn't be able to ticket somebody who doesn't stop for the RRFBs. I have a fair amount more to say, but I'll send it to you in writing, so thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Stephanie Preston.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Preston. Just speaking for myself, I think that bike lanes need to be added to the Pauline project before it goes out for public review. But today I'm here to support A2 Safe Transport to discuss issues with safe crossing at Community High School. We've been working with the city and with Community High School to figure out a solution. Currently, there's a DDA project in Carytown, just adjacent to Community on North 5th in Detroit. This will promise to be a great project, however, it will take all year. In the meantime, there's no safe way for the students to get to and from school, or for users of the farmers market, Carytown, Sparrow Market, etc., to safely use this corridor in the meantime. Right now, the safer, more often used crosswalk goes from the farmers market here to the middle of the grassy area of the parking lot at Community. However, this one is dismantled, currently dismantled. The one that is being used here, and there's gateway treatments that we appreciate, is down here. However, if a student or a person crosses here to get to community, they still have to cross Detroit. There's no crosswalk on Detroit, and at that location, cars are turning in 2 different directions simultaneously right into where the students would have to cross. They're turning to make U-turns onto Detroit, and they're turning to go into the parking lot to drop off as they've been directed to by community. So this is not tenable. The only possible spot you can cross safely in the near term is here. We need there to be a crosswalk at this location that has ADA compliant ramps and RRFP so that people can get across. As you notice, there's also no way to cross up here because this Detroit traffic is turning onto North 5th and into the parking lot in the same manner as in the other dangerous location. It's a very tricky intersection, we get that. There's literally only one location where they can get across safely, and we know that the city can prioritize having some safe option in the meantime, even though there is a construction project going on. As you know, it's going to be darker and darker in the mornings. Within a month, it will be completely dark at the time students arrive at community. So this needs to be resolved immediately. We're excited about the new project, but we cannot leave the community without any safe options, especially in the dark months ahead. Thank you so much for your attention to this matter.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Jared Hoffert.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, members of council. My name is Jared Hoffert, and I am the Democratic nominee for City Council in and a resident of Ward 2. I'm here tonight to speak to item DC-8 on the agenda, the resolution to direct our city administrator to review Ann Arbor's current crosswalk laws. I would like to express my sincere desire that any review of this law is with an eye toward further education of its specifics to the residents of Ann Arbor, both pedestrian and motorists alike. My concern is that the proposal to review the law is being made with the intention to abolish or diminish it, which would be an unconscionable act. Ann Arbor has always been a city that values pedestrian safety, and our laws need to reflect this value. I applaud the fact that our police force is fully enforcing this law, and particularly at a time when our children have started school again. Simple paint lines on the street do not deter drivers from breaking the rules, and nobody should have to put their foot in the street in front of oncoming traffic for a driver to know to stop. I understand that perhaps some drivers are confused as when to stop. The answer seems simple: when someone is waiting at the edge of a crosswalk. Even if the pedestrian intent is not clear, it only takes a few seconds out of the driver's time to ensure that no incidents occur. I enjoy driving as well, but I also know that I bear more responsibility behind the wheel of a one-ton vehicle. There are creative ways to address any existing confusion around this law, inclusive of social media campaigns, videos, PSAs, etc. And frankly, sometimes a $130 or $140 ticket is education enough. In any event, what we have on the books is now a much-needed safety measure that protects the most vulnerable party in this instance, the human body versus a car. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd like to think that we can take a few extra seconds out of our day to slow down and look out for our pedestrian neighbors. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Adrian Wiley.
I'm Adrian Wiley. I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward who's both aware of the crosswalk ordinance and appreciative of the attempt to increase safety for pedestrians. However, recently I became aware of some safety issues related to the ordinance and some ethical questions regarding the police enforcement of it. Last Monday, the police were doing a targeted enforcement of Platte Road. This doesn't involve real pedestrians, but rather an insider working with the police who poses as a pedestrian. The individual they used was an African-American man dressed in dark clothing. This was in stark contrast to the highly visible safety vests that the police were wearing. The police also decided on using a crosswalk that had no flashing warning lights, and we all know how valuable these lights are to giving drivers notice that a pedestrian is up ahead and wants to cross. So they did this on Monday, which is trash collection day. The verge of Platte was lined with garbage and recycling bins along with traffic cones, a complete obstruction to viewing the already difficult to see pedestrian. And just to make it clear how bad this obstruction was, I took the photo that's in front of you that same afternoon of the approach towards the crosswalk. As I was driving north on the corner before the crosswalk, I noticed a commotion happening on the left side of the road. There were police cars lining Sharon Drive, and an officer appeared to be frantically waving at cars heading south. It was just then, on the opposite side of the road, that I saw the individual that the police chose to act as a pedestrian. He was standing in the 3-foot gap between the curb and the sidewalk. I was going the speed limit, 35 miles per hour, so I had a fraction of a second to decide whether I should slam on the brakes or just go through. The car immediately behind me was also doing 35 miles per hour, so I decided to avoid a rear-end collision and proceed through, as did the car following me. Half a block up was a police officer who waved me over. He let me know that I had broken the law and gave me a ticket, a $140 ticket. This police setup may be a worst-case scenario, but it is an example where attempting to follow the ordinance could result in an accident. There's also reason to question why the police chose to set up a worst-case scenario. They seem to take every step possible to prevent drivers from being aware that there was a pedestrian up ahead. I believe that common sense enforcement is quite different from police setups if the public views the hundreds of $140 tickets as a cash cow. Then police and the city, by allowing this to happen, could begin to lose the trust of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Peter Eckstein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In May, Lindsay Kaneki of the Ann Arbor News wrote an article in which she pointed out that in a previous 12-month period, there had been one homicide in Ann Arbor, but 5 instances of people jumping or falling off an Ann Arbor parking structure, 3 of them dying, 2 of them being grievously injured. Since then, 2 more young people have jumped from our parking structures. This is a crisis. This is an emergency. And I want to say that thwarting suicide is not a futile act. And I think maybe Dr. Graydon can just go into that in more detail. This is often an impulsive act which passes with time. Now, the DDA has said that they have been looking into this problem, and they've researched what the best practices are with barriers, and barriers are the ultimate solution. They've sought bids, found only one bid, which was $1.4 million to deal with the problem. Frankly, I don't think that's more money than this problem deserves, but I think it's more money than it might require. I've got a few pictures here. This is the William Street roof. Here are some loiterers. I know we have 0 tolerance for loiterers, but there they were. And the other picture, the other side, gives an idea of the expanse of this and how low this barrier is between the individual and oblivion. And the next picture shows what it looks like if you lean over, or even worse yet, climb over your dead on Main Street or just in back of it. Now, the DDA asked for a definition of best practices, and I'm sure it was wonderful. My feeling is we should go to good practices, even if we can do that for less money, even if they have to be temporary. But let's stop this epidemic. And here's an example, of good practices. And I didn't have to even go as far as Grand Rapids to find this example. I went to Maynard Street. And I basically then didn't put out bids, but I went this morning to a fencing company here in Ann Arbor. And basically, my best guess is that they could fence in that one Washington Street picture, structure, the roof portion, for about $20,000. Now, that's just one structure and just one portion of it, but that would be 1/69th of the amount of money that the low bidder or the only bidder was charging. So
Thank you.
act immediately.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is John Graydon.
Thank you. I'm John Graydon. I'm the founder and executive director of the University of Michigan Comprehensive Depression Center and the founding chair of the National Network of Depression Centers, involving 26 universities across the country. There are a lot of data that have been accumulated about risks for death by suicide. It's a growing concern for the country. Last year, more than 42,000 people died of suicide in this country. This is Ann Arbor, and it's tragic when we start having some of our youth be among those, and they were. This is actually something that I will just address, not structure as such, but 80 to 90% of deaths by suicide are linked with brain mental illnesses. They are associated with clinical depressions, anxiety, substance use, sometimes head trauma, but these are illnesses that are treatable. When these underlying illnesses are properly treated, the risks for suicide tend to go down. And during times of high risk, when they're not treated and when the illness is running rampant, these are really vulnerable times, situations that set off thoughts of suicide and how one might do it are really dangerous. And we have some of these now in this community. Parking garages or bridges, understandably, sometimes are identified by such individuals as high risk. We're not here to talk about guns and other approaches, but we are here to address some that we might do something about. Physical barriers, and this is a key point for me, and I would be glad to share data at some other time. Physical barriers, such as fencing and screening, provide deterrence to these impulsive times. They work. They have been shown to be successful in decreasing suicide rates in high-risk places. That means they save lives. Those individuals then have a chance, an opportunity to get treatment. Signage may help. The data are less clear. We've done that. We've actually put signage up. More is needed, and I know that there are barriers because of the issue of cost, perhaps construction companies going south, but I would just urge Council and DDA to stay with this issue and to get back to it at a time whenever we can and to take the steps that are necessary. This is Ann Arbor, and we will save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Alan Haber.
Hello, Council. As you know, I've sent you several, I think 3 communications regarding International Day of Peace and the Ann Arbor Peace Week that began Sunday. A very nice, sweet time in the park to be, I hope. And I brought to your attention the resolutions from the United States Council Conference of Mayors describing legislation at the local level that is recommended for community governments to take in reference, say, to the 15,000 nuclear weapons poised to destroy the life system as a whole. And referring to you also the resolution from the Mayors for Peace from many thousand cities all over the world that similarly ask local governments like yourselves to pay attention to the fact the life system itself is in jeopardy because of the nuclear weapons. And I call to your attention that the United Nations has now adopted a form of a treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons that you should be aware of. And that the Ann Arbor Peace Week was a time that you could well engage in such conversations and thoughts, but in particular that you should make a resolution to honor an International Day of Peace, as was done 2 years ago, and I sent you a draft of what might be such a resolution to call community attention. Well, as you all know, I have received zero response to any of these communications. Brought to mind the poem, No man is an island entire in self, removed from the whole, whatever it is. You must have all studied that in school. Well, no city is an island entire in self. But you seem to act as though ours is. Well, I was looking at the agenda to see if this request for a resolution, a proclamation for Peace Day, did make it to your attention, and it did not. But then I saw you have a resolution for Constitution Day, and so that prompted me to come here and remind you that the people do have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievance. That is our constitutional right, and our city attorney, and you with your compliance, has denied us that right and used a local ruling appropriate to initiatives for referendum for legislation, not appropriate for federally guaranteed constitutional rights. Our rights have been violated. Your oath that you sworn to uphold the Constitution, you have all violated.
Thank you.
And the matter is not done. But anyhow, this is Peace Day on Thursday.
Thank you.
And next Sunday, Peace Week. You're all still invited.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Adam Brent.
Good evening. My name is Adam Brent. I am the CEO of Cocoa Corporation, a Michigan-based composting operation. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to bring to the City Council's attention the decision that was made to award the RFP 1725 Compost Facility Management Contract to We Care Organics. Despite some opposition to hiring an out-of-state contractor in 2011, We Care was awarded the contract for operating the city's compost facility. A few of the main obligations to operating the facility included grinding all yard waste and wood waste, removing and disposing of all contaminants from the compost, and potentially giving back to the city approximately $36,000 per year from third-party waste stream tipping revenue and compost sales. In addition to comply with all DEQ rules regarding composting regulations in the state of Michigan, and the notes from the City Council deliberations, stated that We Care would increase jobs and increase composting volume at the facility. As part of the new RFP process, we visited the compost operation in early August and discovered that, according to We Care's employee, their grinder has been broken for almost 2 years, and the facility's windrows resemble a beaver dam with nothing more than unground material, a clear violation of their contract with the city. The windrows are inundated with contaminants, glass, metal, plastic, concrete, and their, quote, overs pile would cost about $100,000 to sort and grind or send to the landfill. According to the DEQ's records of composting volumes, and despite no net increase in annual volumes, We Care has increased the amount of organic material on site from 11,000 cubic yards in 2011 to over 61,000 cubic yards at the end of 2016. A clear violation of DEQ rules and would make paying the city its $36,000 per year unlikely based on the rates listed in their contract. Moreover, this callous disregard for composting is turning Ann Arbor's compost site into a quasi-landfill. We Care only employs 2 people, and the list of equipment they put on their RFP do not exist at the facility. In fact, We Care subcontracts their screening operations to another company and hasn't bothered to spend the money to fix their grinder. What makes this so unpalatable is that Cocoa was never interviewed in the RFP process, and what appears to be a blatant conflict of interest, Christina Gomes, the city's solid waste and recycling program coordinator, was listed as a reference on We Care's proposal, and she's one of the 3 people on the selection committee. Cocoa Corporation is asking for a level playing field. We would like the City Council to make this process open and transparent to the public, visit both facilities, check our references, and then make an informed decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Charles Ream. Mr. Ream. Our next speaker is Mark Passerini.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, City Council. My name is Mark Passerini. I'm a resident of the Water Hill community. I want to thank you for letting me speak. The topic that I'm speaking on is not on the agenda tonight, so I'm going to keep my comments pretty brief. Pretty much all of you, with the exception of one or two of you, have toured our facility over the past few years. And 5 years ago, this body passed a ordinance, a zoning and licensing ordinance. Unfortunately, at the time, the city decided to wait until the state regulated the existing provisioning centers, otherwise known as dispensaries. I'm here to ask this council to make permitting existing dispensaries a top priority over the next few weeks. Over the past few years, we've had, I think, a total of 8 or 9 dispensaries that have operated since day one. Just as a update, we actually conducted a study, a study with the University of Michigan that included hundreds of our patients, and it was recently published in the Journal of Pain. That study found that 64% of participants had a decrease in opioid use. As I'm sure everybody on the council knows, the opioid crisis is real on a nationwide level. And one thing that we've found, as well as all of my counterparts here in Ann Arbor have found, is that we've been told all of our lives that cannabis is a gateway drug, when in actuality it's an exit drug. So I'm asking you to maintain Ann Arbor's identity of being one of the most progressive, evolved, compassionate, and thought-leading communities in the world. Make this a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Charmy Glossen. Charmy Glossen. Our next alternate speaker is Dory Edwards. Dory Edwards. We now come to communications from council. Are there communications from council? Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. 3 items. First of all, regarding the efforts to provide deterrence on our parking structures, I agree that if we aren't able to find a cost-effective permanent solution in the short term, we should be looking at an intermediate solution that helps provide that deterrence. So I think those comments were well taken. Second, regarding the crossing on 5th by Community High, the speakers described the importance of having the crosswalk go to a curb ramp. As near as I can tell, the location that they cited on the map does not have a curb ramp an ADA compliant curb ramp on the east side of the street, perpendicular to where the curb ramp is on the west side. So as we're talking about those interim solutions, trying to find where we can do it with the existing infrastructure until we get the long-term engineering and built infrastructure in those sites is important. Third, and this one's a little bit more fun, a month ago when we were discussing on City Council the response to the vandalism at the skate park, I put out an idea of responding to the hate speech by a party celebrating our diversity, our inclusion, the vibrancy that is in Ann Arbor. I've had a great response from the skate community, the business community, and others. So on October 8th, there will be a Skate Against Hate event at the skate park. We're going to have food trucks. We're going to have skate demonstrations. We're going to have DJs. We're going to have an education tent. We're going to have waste. You know, oftentimes when people come to these kinds of things, they just talk to the people they already know. So we're going to have we're working to do the fundraising so we can have T-shirts. So talk to 5 strangers, get a free event T-shirt. So people are building some of those communications across our community. And we're also looking for ways through corporate sponsorship and other means to do it as a fundraiser for some of the organizations in our community that are on the front lines of work against hate and for inclusion. Groups like Peace Neighborhood Center, the Jim Toy Center, Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, as well as the Friends of Ann Arbor Skate Park, because with their programs like the all-girls skate they do, trying to increase the diversity within the skating community, they're doing amazing work as well. So that's going to be on October 8th from 2 to 6 p.m., and I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Further communication from council? I'd like to request the following nomination that was presented to council on September 5, 2017, to the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, Thaddeus Zabanka. May I have a motion, please, moved by Councilmember Lum, Ackermans, Councilmember Crapel. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Nomination is confirmed. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Westfall.
I would request pulling CA9, please.
Removing CA9? Or moving CA9 to another
To a
point?
discussion item, yes.
All right. We'll move CA9 to
DC1? DS1?
DS1. Further discussion of the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda is approved unanimously with 11 council members present, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA4, CA5, noting that CA9 has been removed and placed on our ordinary agenda. We now come to a set of public hearings. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about specific matters on the agenda. Your speech must relate to the specific subject of the public hearing. Speakers do not need to have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Public hearing number 1, an ordinance to amend sections 51019, 51020, 564, 565, 566, and 570 of Chapter 55 zoning, and sections 5169 of Chapter 59 off-street parking of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at this public hearing?
My name is Edward Vilmetti. I'd like to speak to the off-street parking requirements, specifically to the extent that off-street parking is done through structures. I know that that has been a downtown habit of late. And I'd like to encourage that the zoning and building codes incorporate the best available practices for safety in those structures. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing?
I'll bring this down to me. My name is Ethel Potts, and as I see, all of the D1 and D2 amendments are again on your agenda. Did you actually pass the section, at first reading, the section with premiums? Not that I heard, so I'll be listening. The amendments to design of building appearance that you have discussed and adopted, I think will help the appearance of new construction. But my major question is, point 1, why have the character overlays in that same section not been used to give us plazas and front courtyards along Huron Street? Also, there's been no use of the diagonals in that section, which would have given us small lots along South U with new building step backs, giving us slender towers on South U away from the street. There are no front plazas or slender towers on the new construction anywhere in downtown. Why not? Why didn't you use these processes? Premiums to incentivize features, the features that are desirable to the public are not, I think they are not ready to be approved. You have not discussed them yet, and I will listen for your discussion. My point two, the general housing premium has been so generous in the past that when developers use that premium, they don't need to use any of the others. We've got lots of housing. Why continue to give it a premium? How about office use as a premium? Commission took housing housing premium out of the ordinance, but now has put it back. Why? I think the general housing premium has served its purpose. Point three, pedestrian amenities premium. Plazas, courtyards, arcades, planted open space has been taken out of the ordinance. Then it was put back in, and now it's taken out again. I think we should put it back in. I think we need these design features in our downtown. Point four, we have proposed such a complex energy efficiency set of standards, and then at the end, I will quote, "There is no penalty if the applicant fails to maintain its LEED certification beyond 3 years after receiving the certification." Doesn't energy efficiency matter after all? I would think not. I look forward to your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing?
Hi, I'm Cecilia Pilon.
Hi, I'm Soraya Streeter, and sorry, but I left the cat ears at home.
We're here to talk about Stephanie Preston's Safeway crossing at Community High School.
We care about this because we both have friends that go to community, and I honestly have a younger sister that goes.
I'm sorry, this is the protocol requires that this is a public hearing and the subject has to be the subject matter of the public hearing.
Your turn. You're a big girl.
No.
Oh my God, you're a big baby.
There's an opportunity for public comment at the end
there's
of the
I
meeting.
thought we wanted. Oh my God, you're a baby.
My apologies. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, an ordinance to amend Section 970 of Chapter 108, disorderly conduct of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 3, resolution to approve the gallery planned project site plan and development agreement, 441 South Ashley Street. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at this public hearing?
This is another one of those very low-lying areas in Allen's Creek Valley. Across the street are houses, and they suffer with streets loaded with water on occasion. They do have a certain amount of flooding, and that is my main concern. This project meets all of the requirements for floodplain and so forth, but I think to myself that today, you know, with global warming, who knows what tomorrow will be. So I'm really very concerned that this meets the sort of minimum requirements.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. I'm Brad Moore, architect for the project. As the previous speaker mentioned, this is adjacent to the Elm Creek floodway and floodplain, and we have crafted our building so that it stays entirely out of those two features. Additionally, we have committed to the neighborhood to install flood vents in the walls of the building so that even in a magnitude of a flood event beyond the 100-year storm event, which we're required to design to, whether it be a 200 or 300 or 500-year storm, flood waters will be able to infiltrate the walls and go into the parking level, which is the lowest level of our building, and then work its way back out. In addition, we're providing more pervious area on the site than currently exists the way it's developed now, and we're providing stormwater detention. So there'll be less runoff coming from our site into the floodway and floodplain than there is today. And I have the civil engineer and the developer here if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. As our public comment, the order of our public comment and the number of our public comments are a subject of council rules. Perhaps I can ask council if there might be a waiver of the rules so that we can add an additional public comment meeting, additional public comment session, perhaps a brief one, just before A1.
So moved.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I'll take that as moved that the agenda has been opened and amended to add an additional public comment period, perhaps a brief one, I guess right now. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment, perhaps with respect to a crosswalk at Community High School? No pressure.
I cowardly lied and said you have lost your courage.
Fair enough.
So I guess I'll have to read for both of us. We honestly both have friends, and my little sister goes to community, and honestly, we're concerned because they seem to be the type that wear all black. And we tried to get them one of those light-up construction things, but we need alternative routes because I know from where my sister lives that she has to cross the roads. And honestly, she's been hit by a car almost twice. And honestly, we need alternative routes since, according to Mr. Lazarus, that we aren't building any more roads around Ann Arbor, that we have to figure out ways to get kids across safely and around without alternative methods, since we can't build any more roads and we can't alternate things, and yeah.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public comment period? Seeing no one, this public comment period is closed. A1, regular session meeting minutes of September 5, 2017. May I have a motion, please? Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved. B1, an ordinance to amend sections 51019, 51020, 51064, 564, 565, 568, and 570 of Title 55, Chapter 55, zonings, and sections 5169 of Chapter 59, off-street parking of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion, please, of B1. Councilmember Ackerman.
As a quick recap, because it has been a month before this came, since it's come to the table, this is a second reading to update the language in our zoning premiums for our D1 and D2 districts. And I quickly want to respond to Ms. Potts. We've spoken many times on the subject of premiums, so I'd love to just kind of clarify quickly for you. This will not be changing our premiums in any significant way, but instead adding on regulations to the design of buildings in our D1 and D2 zoning cores. So zoning with respect to the 40% residential remain consistent, as well as things with respect to energy efficiency, and those being two of the most used downtown premiums. This came up as a result of Councilmember Westfall trying to seek ways in which to create a more active and vibrant downtown by changing the uses at the street level in our retail spaces. It was referred to the Planning Commission, which decided that instead of regulating uses, we would instead regulate form. The form, we looked to work that had already been done with respect to premium language that was put forward in 2016. Unfortunately, so I should take a step back. Planning Commission discussed moving forward with new premiums for our downtown buildings, incentivizing certain things and allowing developers to build bigger and denser as a result. Those two things focused on energy efficiency and sustainability and affordability, the two values that the Planning Commission heard most loudly as being representative of our community, searching for more sustainable building practices and searching for more affordable housing. Unfortunately, Lansing being what it is, state law is so, I will say poorly written and less than progressive, that the affordability element has come into question, whether or not it is legal under state law. Right now, you can only regulate affordability if the city owns a stake of the land. So looking at that and taking Councilmember Westfall's suggestion that we should try to create a more vibrant downtown through our zoning, and with the reality that our premiums can't move forward at this time, we decided to splice out part of those recommended premiums that revolved around design quality, take them out, and use them as a means to encourage a more vibrant downtown. And the way in which these new design requirements do that is mandating transparency on the first floor of our D1 buildings, and then also mandating better building materials throughout the entire structures. So we're talking cast stone, real masonry, brick, full brick, as well as eliminating things such as EIFS or vinyl siding or cheap metals. I think this serves to do two things. One, the transparency, which we've further clarified since the last reading, incentivizes retail. These are uses that are going to be more active and welcoming for business owners and to the public, as well as creating a downtown that, while it is changing, respects and honors the character from which we come, one that is a Midwestern college town. And I hope this is part of building a bridge between what is the development that we need to create an affordable Ann Arbor, create a more environmentally sustainable order, Ann Arbor, allowing more people to live here closer to their jobs, taking them off the roads, as well as building our tax base. We heard last week that a third to two-thirds of all of the new revenue that we've created since the recession has come from new development. If we want to balance our budget and we want to provide the services that we need to provide because we promised them to our residents, we need a new tax base. And development is the means to do that as the system exists today. But I hope that it bridges the gap because we do have a history and we do come from somewhere. And making sure that that progress is in line and speaks to and speaks with that legacy, I think, is in everyone's interest. So I'm excited to move forward with this at second reading.
Further discussion? Councilmember Love.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Ackerman, for all your work on this. As the Council Planning Commission liaison, your work is appreciated. Obviously, you're very knowledgeable, and you spent a lot of time on this, as has the staff and the Planning Commission. So thanks to everyone for all their hard work on this. I appreciate that tonight you addressed Ms. Potts's concerns and clarified that that the FAR premiums discussion, that's on hold. We had asked the staff and the Planning Commission in January to look at how to improve the pedestrian, experience downtown. And I am glad to see that the recommended approach here is to utilize design guidelines and requirements. And I think that's a far better approach to achieve the objectives than restricting the uses of the property. And I also appreciate that the new standards have been refined along the way to reflect different guidelines in D1 and D2 zoned areas downtown. The 15-foot medium height for street-level ground floor is appropriate in D1, but may or may not be appropriate for D2. And I think the same is true for the specific transparency guidelines. While I recognize the standards, particularly those related to building materials that you talked about, may result in a marginally higher cost of construction, I do think that the higher quality and improved aesthetics that we'll see are worth it. The new standards related to ground floor windows also will make I think, a positive difference in design. So I think this is a step forward. I'll be supporting this, and again, thanks to staff and Planning Commission, Councilmember Ackerman for all their good work in bringing these to us tonight. And just a postscript, when the FAR premium proposal does come back, I would like us to follow up on why we have a residential premium. I mean, I can understand incentivizing affordable housing or workforce housing, but not normal market rate housing. I just don't see the need for incentivizing market rate housing, so we'll look forward to that discussion. Thanks.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks again to Councilmember Ackerman and all of Planning Commission and staff for the great work on this. I think it's a huge step forward. It's one of the main complaints we get about buildings is aesthetics, and I think we could go farther in that realm, but I think this is an excellent first step. Downtown businesses will always be in flux, and what is undeniable about what people look for in an active downtown is the ability to see into buildings and to see into activity where they're walking for purposes of vibrancy and safety. So the transparency is a great step forward, in addition to prohibiting things like blinds and other window coverings. So I'm fully in support of what's being proposed. As you might suspect, when I asked this discussion to begin, I still think this doesn't go far enough. Shopping malls aren't what they used to be, but they still take a lot of business away from downtowns. And one of the reasons they can do that is that they can manage the mix of retail that's in them. And one thing that they traditionally never allow are things like banks and offices, because those are very specific destinations, and it's not typically what people who are just window shopping want to be near. Once you've lived in town for a bit, you sort of gloss over all the spots where there's no activity, and you know your favorite spots, and you walk past blank walls without a second thought once you're used to it. But after a while, after more uses that are not open at night encroach, what ends up happening is you decrease the property values and you decrease the viability of retail and restaurants around these dead uses. So I'd still like to pursue that angle, but for now, I'm very happy that this is moving forward, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. Although I'll be voting for this, I'm pretty skeptical about us regulating development in this fashion, where we require our particular appearances for the first floor. I think that developers probably know our market better than we know it. The fact is that the cost of new construction is so high that that's the biggest barrier to active uses. The last time we discussed these regulations, after that meeting, a couple of colleagues and I left here and walked past a number of storefronts that were empty. They had this kind of transparency and open windows and would be ideal for retail if only we could afford the cost of the downtown rents at this time. So we already have the empty space in the very kind of building that we're telling developers that they're going to have to include in future developments. Nonetheless, I believe that it's worth experimenting with. I do have a question about the status of the state legislation regarding premiums that made us put our affordable housing discussion on hold. So if there's anyone here that could answer.
To Mr. Delacourt.
As I recall, it was sometime in January when there was a discussion in Lansing about regulating our local zonings to prevent us from requiring affordable housing. Do you know the status of that legislation?
The last I heard, at least the most recent update I had, is that that legislation, it's a minor change in the legislation for clarity on the ability of the city to enforce as part of PUD or incentive-based zoning regulations, affordability as part of projects. There was some confusion as whether that fell under the rent control regulations. That legislation has been changed, and it's my understanding it's still in committee. We have been waiting anxiously for that to come out of committee and to be considered by the full legislator. I don't have a timetable for that.
So as currently proposed, would it interfere with our ability to offer additional floor space in exchange for affordable housing? Or does it just affect our ability to require affordable housing?
Somewhere in the middle, if I understand it correctly, and I know a little bit or just enough to be dangerous, and I won't speak to the legal aspects of it. But my understanding is the problem we have now is we certainly can ask for it as part of a PUD, or it can be offered as part of conditional zoning. The difficulty right now is enforcing long-term that regulation. If the property were to change hands and they were determined or decide to no longer go along with that, it's the city's ability to enforce those affordable units over a long period of time that's in question.
Would it prevent us from allowing a developer to pay for affordable housing elsewhere? Contribute to an affordable housing fund in exchange for extra floors or square foot of space?
That I don't know the answer to.
Also, can you tell me what the status of our discussion on changing our parking requirements for downtown development?
I know it's under discussion when there'll be actual ordinance language or proposed ordinance language. I think there's a workshop coming up shortly with the DDA that's going to deal specifically with parking. And then I think we'll take as staff our direction from those discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, Councilmember Eden, just for clarity from the Planning Commission, we'll be taking up parking both in the downtown and externally for all development as part of our work plan for this fiscal year.
Because as I understood, originally we were proposing that new development couldn't accomplish their parking requirement through long-term leases with our parking system. And then we've backed away from that. And as we embark on building $18 million worth of additional parking, I wonder why we're backing away from.
I think that'll be a good conversation for the joint session with the DDA.
Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. B2, an ordinance to amend Section 970 of Chapter 108, Disorderly Conduct of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Moved by Councilmember Warpechowski, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion of B2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. We now come to DC1, resolution to appoint Thomas Wright to the Cable Communications Commission. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Crapel. Discussion, please, of DC1. Councilmember Eaton.
I urge you to approve this appointment. We have trouble finding volunteers for this committee because it meets in the middle of an afternoon. This particular gentleman has been very active in our studios at CTN and knows of the services and the value that CTN provides to the community. Although he does not live within Ann Arbor, I urge you to support his nomination because we need the members.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
Yes, as noted, this gentleman's not a city resident, but he is employed by the Michigan Media Network, so clearly has relevant experience, and I think will certainly add value to these discussions, and we'll be supporting this recommendation.
All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC2, resolution to urge Congress to take immediate action to protect deferred action for child arrivals program. Moved by Councilmember Kalasapathy, seconded by Councilmember Eden. Discussion, please, of DC2. Councilmember Kalasapathy.
Thank you. This body passed a resolution maybe 5 days before the end of President Obama stepping down to asking him, we were one of the many municipalities that sent a resolution asking him to pardon the DACA recipients, which was not pardoned because it was done under executive order. So this resolution is basically being sent to Debbie Dingell and Michigan group of legislators, asking them to swiftly act on this issue so that it becomes the law of the land. So I don't think this is a controversial issue for our city council or for our community, but it's important to remember that there are 800,000 people who are affected by this, and all of them came as children, and I don't think in any civilized society we are going to hold children responsible for the actions of their parents. I'm not even saying what the parents did is wrong, but it's definitely wrong to punish children. So I hope Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and others would act swiftly and pass this, and this becomes the law of the land. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eden.
Thank you. Typically, I'm hesitant to support resolutions that tell other governmental units what to do. But I'm really enthusiastic about this because this has an impact on members of our community. The attacks on immigrants and the DACA children affects families across the whole country, including Ann Arbor. And so I happily am supporting this and am co-sponsoring it.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to say a very sincere thank you to Councilmembers Calasapathy and Councilmember Eaton for your continued leadership on all of these issues, along with Mayor Taylor and Councilmember Warpowski. You guys have been indomitable champions, and I think I can't speak for all of us, but as we keep pushing through this administration, I trust that we're all behind you every step of the way. I think our state has been seeing very real consequences of laws or executive orders passed since January. Executive orders that very much target people who simply weren't born here. We saw a travel ban that risked a resident's life by not allowing them to seek emergency medical treatment. We've seen a mother, a beloved community member, a church member deported. We've seen Christians from Iraq being threatened with deportation, some of whom have served our military as translators, being sent back to an unstable nation in which they'd inevitably be killed. These are very much regulation or executive orders that threaten our neighbors in a very real and catastrophic ways. And now we're talking about children, my peers, people who came to Ann Arbor at the same time I did. You know, the age of 8, I had no say in that. And we're now expecting them to pay consequences for what is questionably a wrongdoing and even more questionably their decision. So again, thank you to the sponsors. This is a tragedy waiting to unfold.
Further discussion? Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the authors of this resolution. Like many, I feel sometimes that we are shouting into the abyss, but I think it's necessary we continue to do so. There is no excuse for targeting vulnerable populations within our community, and we've gotten feedback that when we speak up, it's a comfort, and I think it can have effect over the long term. I reject all of these policies that embolden hate and take advantage of these communities, and I'm happy we can speak up for them in any way we can. Thanks.
Further discussion?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Is approved. I will note, looking backwards with respect to DC 1, that there are 11 council members present, all voting in the alternative, thus satisfying the all voting in the affirmative, thank you. Thus satisfying the 7-vote requirement. DC 3, resolution of intent regarding applications of potential Washtenaw County millage to support community mental health department, county sheriff operations, and policing jurisdictions rebate. Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Frenzel. Discussion, please, of DC 3. Councilmember
I led last time.
Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. We're bringing this back before you this evening to provide some information about how the city might spend some of the money that kicks back to us under the county's millage proposal that will be on the ballot before voters in November. Just to provide a little bit of clarification for folks watching at home that might not have recently read the details of the county's mental health public safety millage. Those jurisdictions that provide their own police departments, which Ann Arbor is one, would be refunded a certain amount of our contribution under this millage language that's before voters. And in discussing this with my colleagues, I do think it is, because the money goes back to the general fund, I do think that voters want to know how we might spend that money, because that will probably have a material impact on how they make up their mind on this ballot issue. Love or hate how the county has put it together, this is what they've put out there for the public to vote on. And we will all have the opportunity to do that in November. I think that this is the responsible course of action for us to take to provide this level of information to our residents so that they can make their own decisions about whether or not they support this particular millage.
Councilmember Frenzel.
I just go on to say that I trust our colleagues at the county level to bring forward a proposal that they feel that their organization and our community at large needs. It is our community's decision to decide whether or not we agree with them. My concern originally when seeing that millage language is that if our residents in the city of Ann Arbor felt like we were getting double taxed for police, we would turn it down and therefore turn down wholly the millage that our county colleagues were pulling forward. So one of my main interests is to ensure that our residents know that we're going to take that money that's refunded and do something that we've all agreed repeatedly is our very high priorities for us.
For my part, as one of the resolution sponsors, I want to follow up on what Council Members Smith and Frenzel have said. The county bringing forward the millage that's structured in this fashion, I think is incumbent upon us to describe how we intend to use monies that, if the millage passed, would come back to the city. That's something that we consistently do with use resolutions, by way of most recent example, I believe, with respect to the local streets millage, in which we describe the motorized and non-motorized usage that street millage would be suitable for here. In the event that the millage passes, there will be a decent amount of money that will come back to the city for general fund purposes. We have a set of needs in the city that have been consistently identified as pressing, but for which there is no dedicated funding source. The millage monies coming back from the county in this context would, I believe, provide an appropriate and useful funding source. 20% to augment what we already spend on bicycle and pedestrian safety, which is substantial, but I think, as we all know, is not sufficient for our purpose to meet our aspirations of safety throughout the community. Also, too, we have an affordable housing problem in the city and not enough monies to address it. 40% of the rebated monies would go a long way to doing so. It would not solve the problem, but it would continue to push us forward. And finally, the city and its residents continue to speak eloquently and passionately about the need to take meaningful climate action. We can't solve the problem, but we can do our part. But we can only do our part with resources. The city has an ambitious and thoughtful climate action plan. This 40% allocation would provide funds suitable and necessary to implement that plan, to affect its goals. And so that is why I believe it's appropriate that we tell the voters how we would spend the money if they chose to provide it. And that is why I have, and I believe my colleague co-sponsors have proposed to allocate it in this fashion. Further discussion? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Last Monday, we had a council work session on revenue and how going forward, due to some actions of the state that were definitely, we have some unpalatable options to try to raise revenue. This does not tell residents how to vote, but it does give them information that's very much in line with our joint values and with the requests that we very consistently hear from residents. So I think even if we look this evening at speakers who came forward and what they were asking for these very things. What are you doing to think about affordable housing? What are you doing to help improve crossings and lighting? And then we certainly continue to hear about, greater, desire for the city to be able to incentivize and support residents who want to do their part for climate change, so, or to combat climate change. So I look forward to supporting this and appreciate the intent behind it.
Further discussion? Councilor Eaton.
Thank you. I would have supported a mental health millage if the county had given us a simple mental health services millage. The mental health services that the county provides are essential to our community. They're at the core of most of the problems that we have, including homelessness, substance abuse, crime, joblessness. But they've really done us a disservice by muddling that issue in this fashion. So not only will I not be supporting this resolution, but I won't be supporting that millage because they really made a mess here. This resolution actually demonstrates how easy it is for this council with 6 votes to change the particulars of how we're going to use this so-called rebate. Any 6 votes in any particular budget year can redirect these funds into anything that that council at that time wishes to do. And that's what they've done to us. They've given us this easy access to money that we appear to intend to use just to fill in our wish list, rather than weighing our priorities and our options during a fuller budget discussion where we discuss all of our expenses. So I can't support this, and I won't be supporting that millage.
Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. First of all, on the strength of council saying this is what you're getting for your vote when you pass a millage, council has a long history of setting up resolutions that say establish that intent. The one that comes to mind for me every budget season is the Parks Fairness Resolution. I will be honest, I actually don't think that is, if we were to set that rule now and say, is this how you want to spend that extra little bit of fund balance, would I put it towards parks? I wouldn't, but I and this body has consistently and unanimously upheld that promise that a previous council made to voters when they passed the parks capital millage. So I've seen this body, yes, it could be overturned. Every time that Parks Fairness Resolution comes up, it is a discretionary vote by this council. But even in hard economic times, this council stood by its word because we recognize that even though the 6-vote requirement is easily changed, that trust when we put that promise to the voters is very important, and we've stood by it. And so I think setting that promise now is important so voters know what they get. I support this resolution, first of all, because I think the 3 items within this resolution are within the scope of the concerns raised by the millage. We heard just today at our public comment and public hearing Concerns about flooding. We honored our firefighters who went down to assist in terms of hurricanes that are getting worse because of climate change. Climate change is a threat to public safety. Climate change is a threat to public safety around the world and here in Ann Arbor. So to do our climate mitigation work, to reduce our carbon emissions, and to improve our resiliency in the face of climate change is in line with a public safety goal. Crosswalks, again, very clear. We heard all the concerns about the danger of our existing crosswalks and crossings. So making our streets, sidewalks, and bike lanes safer for all users is a public safety goal. And clearly, homelessness. Being homelessness, a major cause of homelessness is mental illness, as Councilmember Eaton said, but also homelessness and the trauma of being homelessness exacerbates mental illness, and it's sleeping under a bridge certainly isn't safe. So these goals, these items are in line with the broad millage intent, but I'm also more of this, in terms of the millage itself, I will be supporting the millage because I think what the millage does overall is very important. We're fortunate that we have a city that has invested in work on aligning public safety services and mental health services already. We've put funding into the alternative courts, the drug courts, adding additional treatment so that we can have that as a diversion opportunity. Our police chiefs have talked about establishing mental health first aid and crisis response teams as a way to help integrate this mental health and public safety effort. As the county looks to expand this more broadly, the 4 items that the county is passing in terms of their use, the county is also going through a use ordinance to clearly define to the public how these funds will be used. And on the mental health side, the 4-fold approach they're taking in terms of crisis response, stabilization, prevention, and providing mental health treatment for people in the jail, I think is a very important way to make our community safer. We're seeing a lot of people falling through the cracks. Changes to state and federal funding for mental health, especially state funding, have left big holes in our safety net, and funding the county millage for mental health and public safety, where 76% of the funds will be going, is very important. And this little bit that we're getting back for the rebate to make whole the investment the city has already made, I think we're putting it forward in terms of our highest priorities, our highest unfunded priorities over the next 8 years.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you very much. I did not support the first resolution of intent in July, and will not support this one either for the same reasons. At the top of my list of objections and concerns is that we're making spending commitments, significant commitments, completely outside of the budget process. The city has a robust annual budgeting process that I suspect we'd all agree is very effective. The process has been used for years and includes several detailed, lengthy work sessions with individual departments that are designed to provide the necessary background and context for council to make informed, educated decisions on spending and the budget. And these are very significant commitments. The resolution states that this is how the city will spend roughly $2.5 million a year for 8 years. That's $20 million over the period. So by passing this tonight, we're essentially committing $20 million without rigorous debate, public hearing, or opportunity for public comment like there is on the budget in the spring when the community's attention is focused on the budget. In my view, that's inappropriate and just really poor process. Plus, the city has many underfunded needs beyond the 3 singled out here. I mean, just, a quick short list, fixing roads, improving some roads and intersections like the Nixon Corridor, replacing our aging water and sewer infrastructure, stormwater mitigation, public safety, including traffic enforcement at the schools and in the neighborhoods, addressing an unfunded pension liability, human service funding needs, the Allen Creek Urban Trail. We have a lot of uncertainties in solid waste and recycling, on and on. And so to do what we're doing here tonight, to single out these 3 and to make an 8-year commitment of $20 million outside the normal budget process is not what I call being very fiscally responsible or good budget discipline. When this last came to us in July, it was before the county had decided on the millage structure. At that point, I and others strongly encouraged the county to separate the millage questions on the ballot. They decided not to do that, which is really unfortunate in my view. What we now have is a convoluted, confusing, combined millage tax question that takes 225 plus words on the ballot to try and explain. And even at 225-plus words, the ballot language falls short of actually explaining to Ann Arbor voters what they are getting. There's no mention in the ballot language of climate action spending, affordable housing spending, or pedestrian safety spending. Think about it. This is a tax where Ann Arbor taxpayers will pay over $5 million a year, and there's no mention in the actual ballot language of what almost half, that's 40% to 50% of it, will be used for in Ann Arbor. I don't know why the county chose to structure this the way they did rather than just simple, separate questions, but in my opinion, the result, at least for those communities with their own police forces, is unnecessarily complicated and confusing. It's also not clear to me why the amounts sent back to the jurisdictions with their own police forces is not based on and proportional to the amount paid in by those jurisdictions. It is based instead on populations. Based on the data received in a response to a question this afternoon, it appears the result is that Ann Arbor would receive about $200,000 a year less than we would have if the amount returned were based proportionally on the amount paid in by the respective jurisdictions. In July, the sponsors indicated it was appropriate to indicate to Ann Arbor voters what they were paying for. I'd suggest the better way to do that is by structuring the actual millage so it's clear in the first place when folks read the language on the ballot November 7th. While I understand it's the county, not the city, that created this convoluted, confusing ballot question structure in the first place, I believe that by passing this resolution tonight, by making very significant long-term spending commitments completely outside of the budget process, we're not helping what is already a bad situation, but actually making it worse, compounding it. For all these reasons, I won't be supporting this tonight, and thank you for listening.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, like some of my colleagues who are voicing concern with the potential millages as written, I myself would have preferred to see ballot language that singled out mental health and singled out funding for the sheriff's office. I think the reality of the county government is such that both mental health funding and funding for the sheriff's office is needed. Unfortunately, for the residents of Ann Arbor, we already have, or I should say, actually, fortunately for the residents of Ann Arbor, we already have a tremendous police force and a tremendous fire department and a court system that's just next door. And to pay for that, the residents of Ann Arbor spend nearly $47 million a year. And so I am grateful to the county for sending money back. I am disappointed to see that, that the rebate is based on population rather than taxable value. We know here that in Ann Arbor we have very high property value rates and a high population. The unfortunate reality, though, is that not everyone who owns a home can afford to pitch in for the policing that goes on around our county, and it would be and I think a more equitable solution would not be asking Ann Arbor residents to pay, additional amounts for a better service from the sheriff's office to our out-county neighbors. That said, this is the proposal put in front of us, and we are going to see a substantial rebate, a rebate to the tune of $2.3 to $2.5 million. The way that this use resolution suggests we spend that money seems appropriate in my eyes. 20% to pedestrian safety, 40% to affordable housing, and 40% to climate action. That means at least $460,000 a year for pedestrian and bicyclist safety. That means at least $920,000 a year to affordable housing. That means at least $920,000 a year to fighting for climate action. With respect to pedestrian safety, I applaud the city administrator and staff for finding $2.8 million in our last budget to improve pedestrian safety infrastructure in our city. And I applaud all of us for supporting that overwhelmingly. Some of us even looking for more. That's terrific, and it speaks to the values of our community that everyone deserves to be safe when they commute to work or school, no matter how they want to get there. And I can say that the work of staff and our work during that budget has been well received. Just the other day, Councilmember Grandin and I got a letter from a constituent thanking us for seeing more flashing beacons at crosswalks in the 3rd Ward. But along with that thanks came a request for 4 more. And if we want to accept that thanks and then reinvest in making sure our neighborhoods are safe, we need the funding to do so. And at least $500,000 a year puts us in better footing to protect the people we are obligated to protect. On the climate action piece, we have set tremendous number of goals for climate action planning, and it's one of the few areas in which we have concrete metrics, and we're failing at those metrics. We need to be installing unreal numbers of solar panels on private property and public property to come anywhere close to achieving our climate action goals. And in order to achieve them, we need to find opportunities to help private residential residents invest in solar. We complain about increased property taxes for installing solar panels, and yet we have no mechanism to give low-interest loans to folks, single-family homes looking to update their energy systems and looking to get as far off the grid as you can in Michigan. But not only that, it presents opportunities to help with affordability by decreasing utilities, by helping low-income residents invest in smarter, more modern insulation and weatherproofing around their windows. These are real, tangible things that we just don't have the money to do. Let's talk about investing in new furnaces for low-income families. Then finally, on affordable housing, I think it's easy to talk about affordable housing, and only recently have I started realizing the importance of discussing why we need dedicated local funding. So much of affordable housing across the United States is supplied by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or through the VA. And while all of that funding is up in the air, with budget cuts to HUD reaching $6 billion potentially, we also have to look no further than our agenda tonight, and I refer everyone to CA3 in our consent agenda, which is the Ann Arbor Housing Commission's application for low-income tax credits to the state of Michigan. The way that we fund affordable housing in this community, in this state, in this country is so overly complex and burdensome, and actually is a great case study in government waste. We operate with tax credits, which are incredibly hard to apply for, have constantly changing stipulations and merit structures. And right now, they're written in such a way that Ann Arbor is probably going to be 6th to 10th on the list for this one. And they're looking at no more than four developments to support. So we need local funding to step in when the state and the federal government aren't there for us and aren't there for our low-income neighbors who deserve a right to stay in their homes. And when we're talking about the two locations that are on our agenda tonight, we're talking about an affordable housing project in the 3rd Ward and an affordable housing project in the 1st Ward, both of which are sitting in dire conditions. And the worst case scenario is that we're going to have low-income neighbors living in unsafe environments, exposed to mold, exposed to sinking foundations, exposed to erosions and unstable walls. The best case scenario is that we have incredibly valuable land that would be a great use for affordable housing that's just sitting there and giving 50 families who otherwise could live there no options except to look to Ypsilanti and hopefully get Section 8 vouchers outside of our system. We need local funding. The state makes it burdensome and complex. The federal government may not be there in a year. And we need options, and we need dedicated funding. And this is a way to do it. That was much longer than my 3 minutes, so I'll leave it at that. But these are proven needs, and they're needs that we scratch our heads at when we discuss how to fund them. And this provides a course forward.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you. I'll be brief. That was a great piece of advocacy, and I think overall, I mean, the mental health is, the mental health service benefit that this millage will bring is immense, and it's an unfunded crisis in the county, and I'm pleased that the county is asking the voters for this funding. We can debate whether this should be tied to anything else or not, but the ballot language is here, and as has been stated before, I think it's proper for us to talk about what we would do with this rebate. And as I look down the list, it are things that we've been asked repeatedly for. Bicycle and pedestrian safety. We don't have the funds right now to commit to properly lighting crosswalks and installing as many as we would like, and that is a high public safety priority for me and for many of my constituents. Again, affordable housing, helping us take care of what we've got, and also, while the funds are there, these can be highly leveraged to attract outside funding as well. And it's something I believe fits the values of the community. And the last is called climate action, but in many ways, it's a lot more of a business return on investment. So many of the improvements that we're looking at for climate action actually have to do with saving residents money. These are not symbolic. This is not a symbolic to-do list, but energy efficiency, looking at solar, giving people, helping fund home audits, are empowering people to make changes to structures that pay them back. So I see this as an investment that will have a financial and values-oriented benefit to the community.
Councilman Kalasapathy.
I'll try to be brief as well. I think pretty much all of us agree that this millage should have been structured to separate out mental illness, because this summer I was able to meet a lot of residents, and most of them realize that mental health issue has come to a crisis point, and there has to be something done. So I think if it had been separated out, this millage would have definitely passed. But we need to learn from the past. All of you remember the percentage for art, how we were taking sewer funds and water funds and putting public art in, and people were getting really aggravated because it was specific millages that were being diverted. Then what happens, we put a public art millage, and it had already got such a bad rap that public art millage finally failed too. So I think we need to be learning from history. So part of the problem with this millage, how it's now, how the resolution that we are passing is the monies that are being rebated are fungible, because people want millage monies to be spent for specific purposes. Why do I say this money is fungible? Because one resident actually showed me a postcard that he had received in the mail, and he pointed to the words. He said, "See this person who is running for your city council? Do you know what he has said? He found money." The lit said he had found money for climate action plan. That guy told me, this person didn't find money. This is my tax money. He can't use it like slush money. This is my money. He did not find it. He was really upset and angry, and I had to kind of talk to him how they were trying to provide transparency, but he didn't really buy that. So I think, yeah, I mean, sometimes we set up these millages to almost like we want it to fail. I don't know. So I really am very nervous about talking about what we are going to use these alternate, because I don't think residents are pretty excited. I mean, we need to be clear about if there's climate action, we need to put a millage for climate action or public safety. This is like rebate becomes fungible, and then politicians try to pretend that they found money, which I don't think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you. I would just ask colleagues not to refer to their colleagues sitting at the table in the third person and in the negative in a personal attack.
Councilmember Crapel.
Yes, thank you. I think there's been a lot of discussions about the county millage, but I think what the millage actually represents what they're trying to do. And the challenge they had is trying to express the challenges you have with mental health. You know, in dealing with mental health issues, it's much more than just mental health professionals. It does involve the police or law enforcement, because oftentimes the people introduced are coming in, you know, they are either at the front end or back end dealing with law enforcement. And you need law enforcement trained and tied in closely with the mental health community, ensure that the people get the help they need. And when you look at dealing with mental health is a very complex issue. So whether we like it or not, I think what the county was trying to do was actually incorporated, because if you broke it out in pieces, what are you going to do if you get it for mental health, but then not for the other parts that are so desperately needed in the county in dealing with this issue? You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to treat the problem. You're not going to take care of it. It needs to be a comprehensive funding of all aspects of mental health and dealing with it. I think a big part of it, we're going to be talking later about making our parking ramps safer. Big part of mental health is preventive care, getting people before they get to that crisis point, before we have to spend, before they're going to be up there on the parking deck, before they're going to take that fatal action or that fatal step. And that's a big part about what this is trying to do. And I think if you look at the mental health over the past 30 years, there's been a gradually funding of it, starting with the Reagan years, where you started pulling money out of those, kicking people out of the protective institutions they were in and putting them out in the street, leaving them for local municipalities to have to try and deal with those issues that they weren't prepared to do. And what we're trying to do, I think, as a county, as a community, is step up and say, we can't afford to do that anymore. We need to take a step. And I think that's where the county commissioners are. Now, I would agree that, the language isn't perfect. It would be nice if it would have been cleaner and made we could do it based on tax value, by just our population, but that's not how it was worded. I think each of these issues that we're looking to discuss here basically deal with public safety, some type of public support for affordable housing, and climate action are all things we've talked about every budget session and we never have enough money for. And I think making the commitment that says this is where we're looking to place that money, these are unfunded commitments that the community has said for a number of years that these are important to us, but we haven't been able to fund them. And I think this at least can designate and provide some funds for those without touching monies that go to other critical aspects of the services and things we're trying to provide. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lowe.
A question, I guess, for the city attorney or maybe the city administrator. So I submitted a lot of questions about this this morning, and then, as you know, previously, I had submitted questions that I resubmitted today that I had submitted when this came before us on July 3rd, July 14th, and August 4th, and I resubmitted them this morning because I had never received responses. And then to a number of these questions, the response I got was, it's not the city's role to provide information on another jurisdiction's ballot proposal to voters. So I guess for the city attorney, because it sounds like you're instructing me to refer these, it says the question should refer to the county. My responsibility to file it with the county general counsel?
Yeah,
your recommendation?
I'll have Abby Elias talk about this too. She reviewed this. The part of it you're asking about their intent on the millage and certain aspects of.
I'm asking about the ballot
what they-
language, right, and
of what
the
they-
state, right, the issue of, yeah, consistent with state laws, yeah, legal questions.
Right. And since they set up the millage, you'd really have to, in that sense, their legal counsel can provide advice how they did
Okay,
this
I
and so
will
on.
follow up then.
You can follow up the likelihood that they'll necessarily do this I can't judge whether they'll do that, but I think that was the intent of the response. I don't know if Abby has anything further on it.
Right, so, because I was seeking advice on, the state's election law standard on millages for the quote-unquote clear statement of purpose, which, again, what we've heard tonight and previously is that it's this argument that it's appropriate to indicate to voters what they'll get with the tax and what this tries to do, and yes, who can disagree with that, but the way I come at this is the way you do that is by structuring the millage so it's clear when folks read the language on the ballot November 7th. What we're doing is we're passing a resolution that says we'll spend $20 million on 3 areas, these 3 areas that aren't mentioned at all in the ballot language that folks are going to see on November 7th. So anyway, I've gotten
understand
my
your question. To the
instruction.
extent there's anything further we can add, we'll send it to the council.
Well, I will follow up. Thanks.
Further discussion? Roll call, please, starting with Councilmember Westfall.
Councilmember Westfall?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
No.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Councilmember Crapel?
Yes.
Councilmember Warpowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Cosapathy?
No.
Councilmember Frenzel?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Let's take a short break. resolution to ratify the emergency purchase order request and appropriate funds for steel push wall repair at material recovery facility with Speed Tech equipment, in the amount of $37,278.93. Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Crapo. Discussion of DC 5. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved unanimously with 11 council members present, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. DC 6, resolution to approve purchase order for recycling processing with Western Washtenaw Recycling Authority in the amount of $36,000. Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Warpachowski. Discussion, please, of DC 6. Councilmember Lum.
I support, I just wanted to, interject, because it relates to this, the administrator's update. It just says very informative, and in terms of the fire-related agenda items, but more importantly and strategically about the future of, solid waste and recycling programs overall. So since I didn't thank the administrator previously, I just wanted to interject that. Thanks.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC 7, resolution of support for Ann Arbor Downtown Development Authority management and operational deterrent suicide attempt measures for city parking facilities. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Kalasapathy. Discussion, please, of DC 7. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. In the last year or so, we've seen a number of tragic events where people have jumped or fallen off from our parking structures downtown. And the DDA, to their credit, has engaged in considerable discussion about best practices as to installing structures to try to prevent these tragic events. And more recently, they received a bid that was surprisingly high for the installation of structures to prevent jumps and falls. I believe it came in at about $1.4 million. The simple fact is that we can't wait to take action. We're talking about lives and well-being. I mean, our role as a city government is the health, safety, and welfare of our residents. And this is just a fundamental task that we have to take upon ourselves. I understand that the price tag is high. This resolution seeks either interim measures or a cooperation between the city and the DDA to accomplish things in the immediate time frame rather than waiting for a prolonged discussion about where the money will come from or whether we can get a better price. And so I ask that we pass the resolution because we really can't afford to wait. A person's life is too valuable for us to just fritter away time discussing the costs. So I ask for your support, and I would appreciate it.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I'd like to thank Ms. Pauley for the helpful memo related to this that was included in tonight's materials. The DDA recognizes that suicide prevention and deterrence in their parking structures are important issues, and they've been working on it for about a year now and installed about 80 signs in the structures in April. So I appreciate the DDA's being proactive, and the resolution we're considering tonight expresses council's support for DDA's ongoing efforts. And I want to thank Councilmember Eaton for bringing this forward, and I'm happy to be a co-sponsor along with Councilmember Kalasapathy. The open item at this point is installing, as you know, has been described, physical barriers, fencing, or screening at the structures. The DDA again tried to move forward, but the bids to install the fencing came in much higher than expected. So the installation of physical barriers is on hold for now, and the DDA's plan is to rebid in the winter. While it's not unreasonable, the resolution reiterates to the DDA that the City Council would like the DDA to place a high priority on providing physical barriers in the structures and to consider temporary barriers if the permanent barriers are or delayed. And I too hope we can all support this tonight, and thanks again to Ms. Polly and to Councilmember Eaton for their leadership on this important initiative. Thanks.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to the members who brought this up and to the DDA for moving in this direction. This is personally a hard one. For those who went to Burns Park or Tappan or Pioneer, the University of Michigan in the last decade, we lost a good friend, less than 2 weeks ago. And it feels preventable. And any attempt that we can make to prevent deaths like this, deaths of someone who was a very kind soul, or things that we can do. And I appreciate the DDA trying to do it once and do it right, because that's the way you spend taxpayer dollars. But I think the community is more than willing to pay a premium to see some kind of resolution and see some kind of prevention. And when I think Dr. Graydon looks us in the eyes in his decades and upon decades of experience and says this is something that can make a tangible difference, none of us should hesitate to fully support this, and I doubt anyone will. But yeah, thank you again to the co-sponsors, and I would request my name be added as a co-sponsor as well.
Further discussion? Councilmember Kawasaki.
Yeah, it was really wonderful for Dr. Graydon to come and speak to us, because he has the experience and the data and knowledge. Because sometimes for a lay person like us, I mean, we don't know whether certain things, once a person decides to kill themselves, do they just go ahead, or can there be barriers put in? I mean, that was just, he was very clear with the data and experience that it does. I mean, and all of us have gone through parts of our life when life seems unbearable. It's just getting over that, and putting these barriers just gives that pause or the time that, so I just hope, even if it's temporary, if it's a temporary measure, that we can move ahead and secure these buildings. Thank you.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this resolution. And the feedback from the community is super important here, and we certainly will do everything we can to do our part to prevent these tragedies. I think the hardest part of our job is looking at health and safety trade-offs, because every time you spend money, it's a trade-off, and I am not an expert on if money is better spent in counseling or other interventions, or physical barriers like this. So I'm hoping that we can continue having this discussion and putting our dollars where it really matters.
Councilmember Graham.
Thank you. We heard from some experts tonight, and this has just been, it's been a year of tremendous loss for our community. And I imagine that, like myself, everyone who's sitting at this table and in this room, if they haven't been touched by knowing one of these families directly, knows those who've been, tremendously hurt by these deaths and by these accidents. Mr. Eckstein and I don't agree about certain things, but lots of things. But this is certainly an area where we do agree, and I do appreciate your coming out this evening to speak and to have us think about ways that maybe we can do this differently. Because what we do know about this important public health problem is that it's becoming more prevalent. That these decisions are not like the stereotypes that we think about people writing notes and having these long thoughts and plans. It really is something that happens, that is an impulsive decision, and one that we do want to try to create barriers to prevent this from happening. We're seeing it happen at younger and younger ages, where it's not just young adults and high school kids, but even kids in middle school, where I've had conversations with my own kids about you know, if you have friends who talk about hurting themselves and what do you do? And I, a few years ago, could not really imagine having those conversations that I am having in my own household. So I'm not happy, but very willing to support this.
Further discussion?
Yeah, I'm, you know, want to thank the DDA for having done a decent amount of work on this already. You know, they understood that they have a situation that they need to, that needs engagement, and they are engaged. I'm glad too that the sponsors have brought this resolution forward in light of where, you know, the situation that DDA found itself in with the bid that was sort of, you know, a shocking and surprising bid, but also to, you know, have the council identify that this is a very important thing. Yes, the community has been touched by tragedy so many times over the past, you know, months and short number of years that it is, it's important that we take action. We've heard from experts that this is an action that has the potential to be effective in the most pressing of times, in the most urgent of times. And so I'm glad to be supporting it, understanding that we are in a difficult public health and public safety environment here. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC 8, resolution directing the city administrator to review the Ann Arbor Crosswalk ordinance, moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion, please, of DC 8. Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. First, I want to point out that this resolution does not seek to overturn our current ordinance. It merely seeks a review of our experience with it. Our actions related to this unique ordinance must be made on the basis of good information and best practices. We need to have this ordinance evaluated by a professional traffic engineer. We need to take a look at the experience that we've had with our enforcement efforts. What I've read in the newspaper is that our sampling of enforcement in 2-hour blocks results in so many citations that it should be clear to us that people who drive in Ann Arbor are unaware of our expectations of how they interact with pedestrians. I received an email from the former mayor of the city of Novato, California. She was recounting a visit to Ann Arbor where she and a friend from Chicago were attending a meeting at the University of Michigan. And she got caught in one of our enforcement actions. And she asked me, how is it reasonably possible for me to be aware of your unique ordinance when I live in California and I was just visiting? And I think this is really the fundamental question that we need to ask is, how are we doing with communicating our expectations? And are the results of these sampling of enforcement actions demonstrating that we're not doing very well at all? So, as I said, this resolution doesn't seek to change the ordinance. It just seeks a discussion and a review of our experience under the ordinance. We've been dealing with this ordinance for 6 or 7 years. And I still get really probing questions from residents about what they're supposed to do at particular kinds of crosswalks at particular locations in town. And so I hope that you'll support this simple review. Another element of this is, because it's a unique ordinance, even people who live within Michigan are surprised at our expectations of their behavior in our town. And so I would like to urge our policy committee to seek a uniform statute throughout the state for pedestrian interaction with vehicles. I think that having a uniform statewide standard is probably the best approach. And so, because we do have a policy committee, I hope that they will work to try to accomplish that. Kathy Griswold and I visited Lansing earlier this week, late last week, and talked to a few legislators from both parties. And there really isn't opposition to the idea that we should have a uniform pedestrian law throughout the state. And so I hope that we'll work in that direction. Another thing that I tried to address in this resolution is our recent practice of removing crosswalk ramps. When we remove ramps, that does not mean that pedestrians are going to cease using that location to cross the road. It just means it's going to be horribly inconvenient for people who have mobility limitations or other disabilities. And so I'd like to have that aspect of our behavior reviewed at the same time that we're looking at our ordinance. Thank you.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councilmember Eaton, for bringing this forward tonight. And I'd like to add my name as a co-sponsor. It has been almost 6 years since Ann Arbor adopted its unique crosswalk ordinance, and almost 4 years since council voted to repeal it and replace it with the state rules. But that repeal was vetoed by then Mayor Hefia. After the 6 years, I don't believe there is any better understanding among Ann Arbor residents. And I too field lots of questions from citizens about this matter. And, you know, it just, whenever I get one of these kinds of, you know, inquiries, it's another exclamation point, if you will, about the confusion that's out there. Let alone our many visitors and commuters of Ann Arbor's unique crosswalk ordinance, that vehicles are supposed to stop not only for pedestrians within the crosswalk, but also for pedestrians waiting at the curb line, or ramp leading to a crosswalk. It's not particularly surprising that there would not be a significantly better understanding of Ann Arbor's unique ordinance, given that all our signs continue to say, yield when pedestrians are, quote, within the crosswalk, end quote. So even the new signs we've installed in the roads at school crosswalks say, quote, within the crosswalk, end quote. In any event, and regardless of how someone might feel personally about this issue, it is reasonable to revisit the ordinance, and that's exactly what this resolution does. The resolution basically says, let's take another look based on engineering review and have the city's new Transportation Commission review it and make recommendations as well. The resolution does not take any action or position, it just directs a review. Given that there was never any unanimity on this ordinance when it was adopted, and there still isn't, coupled with the fact that Ann Arbor remains an outlier vis-a-vis the rest of Michigan, it seems very reasonable that we would take another look at the ordinance. We also expected there would be action taken at the state level that might bring the state's and Ann Arbor's rules together, but that has not happened yet, so we remain an outlier. So I hope we'll support this tonight, and thank you again, Councilmember Eaton, for bringing it to us for consideration.
Further discussion? Councilmember Wolfowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. First of all, two questions for the sponsor. First, Councilmember Eaton, when you announced your intent to bring this forward, you had discussed something about definition of crosswalk, but I didn't see anything in there. Could you speak to that, please?
In a little back and forth between staff and myself, those provisions fell out of the resolution.
Okay. Thank you. As I was doing my research, I did find that the state law does define crosswalk. They hyphenate it, so if you just search crosswalk without a hyphen, it's not in there. They also define birthday. They also define person, so it's, if you're into that kind of thing, it can be fun reading. They even tell you if your birthday is on February 29th, what your birthday shall be for the purpose of our motor vehicle code. The second question is, I appreciate the process approach to the endeavor, and if this resolution passes, and I'd be fine, I think, making good faith efforts to respond to the evaluation that would come forward out of it is appropriate for council and the Transportation Commission and the Policy Committee. I guess my question is, if this moves forward, do you see this as a way of laying the controversy to rest? Or if this passes and it doesn't go one way or the other, is this just going to be something, if this goes forward but the outcome isn't what you desire, are we still going to be debating this in the crosswalk law with future resolutions in your vision?
I'm asking for a review so that we can have information so we can have those discussions. I'm not going to engage in any hypothetical of what might happen without knowing what information we get.
Thank you. I'm, in light of that, I'm wrestling with this. So for me, in my experience as a pedestrian, bicyclist, and a driver, I see the value of the ordinance. I've started walking some of my daughter and my neighbor's kids to school once a week, and sometimes we bike. My daughter in the pull-behind bicycle trailer, my neighbor's kids on their bikes. As with the kids bicycling, we're using the sidewalks, and when we cross, the kids get off their bikes and they walk across, and that's fine. And there's a refuge island, and that engineering makes it a lot safer. But in that morning rush, there's not a gap that I can walk my bike and trailer across both lanes of traffic unless traffic stops. I can't even go onto the refuge island because the back of the trailer would hang into the other lane of traffic. So every time I take that trip with those kids, I see how important it is that cars stop before we enter the street to let us enter the street. If this were a way to say we're going to get a recommendation from a traffic engineer, and if council does a good faith, acts on that recommendation in good faith, then we can move on and deal with other ways to improve our pedestrian safety. That would be laying this issue to rest would be worth it for me. What I'm hearing from you is not a commitment to say that this is a path to lay the issue to rest, and that makes me see this, wonder if this is really a good faith effort to get information, or whether this is another play in a game of political football. And I'm now wrestling with whether or not I'm still undecided.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I do feel that this ordinance actually has been reviewed in the last 6 years. We asked our Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force to review it, which then evolved into our current Transportation Commission, and they were unanimous, is my recollection, or incredibly supportive of our ordinance as it stands. Our community continues to evolve much more slowly than we would like, or many of us would like, on pedestrian safety. I can remember when RFBs were first introduced, and I heard complaints from residents like, what are these flashing things? No one knows to stop. The lights are yellow. They're not red. Who would ever do this? It's dangerous. And now we're getting requests left and right from residents for more RFBs in the neighborhood. Education, and it's a process. It takes time. Behavior change is difficult. I wish that we could snap our fingers and everyone would stop. I can tell you in my own walk to work every morning where I cross at Hill and Tappan, drivers don't stop. I do everything. I stand, I give looks, mean ones. I, try to, draw attention, because I'm often crossing with students as well, who maybe aren't paying as close of attention as I am when I'm crossing the street. So, and I often do have to wait for GAPR for someone to stop, and then I try to, reinforce that good behavior with appreciation, as opposed to the nasty looks. But it does take time. We're doing what we can as a city to try to change driver behavior with the campaigns that we have happening now. But to move backwards, I personally, when I go to work in the morning, do not want to have to step out into the street and hope that the drivers who are thinking, please, I hope I get a spot in the parking garage, 10 feet over, and are not thinking about necessarily who's in the road are going to stop. So it does take time, but there are places, I grew up in one myself, where in driver's ed we learned, the first thing we learned in driver's ed was to always stop, that pedestrians always have the right of way. I still remember it all these years later. And behavior is different. Where I grew up in Massachusetts, people do stop more regularly for pedestrians. We're just not there as quickly as we would like. But for that reason, I would like our ordinance to stay where it is and do not plan on supporting this.
Councilmember Frenzel.
As many know, I'm exceptionally into iterative processing, and so the idea of going back for review is critical of any healthy organization or individual, and so I'm drastically supportive of the concept. I would hope that we would do that about all major changes that we're having in our system and new initiatives. I'm generally supportive of the existing ordinance. I don't think it's a bad thing to make people driving large chunks of metal think about what they're doing as they approach people that are standing. Yeah, it's different. That makes you think. Okay, that's fine by me. And to the enforcement side that we've seen recently, time and time again, the safe routes to school conversation that we had in Ward 1 in my neighborhood, just everybody kept asking for more enforcement, more tickets. The people going too fast in my neighborhood across where my kids drive, where my kids walk to school. I want more cops out there. And that's what we're doing. I recognize that that's frustrating to the individuals that got caught or that feel that the enforcement was some sort of a trap. But again, maybe that comes back to the process of evaluating how our police are doing that process. And that's again, a healthy organization will do that. So I'm distinctly on the fence about this. I have a couple of questions either for the administrator, his staff, and or our representative on the Transportation Committee, Mr. Smith. And those revolve mostly around the time frame of this resolution. 3 months is a pretty quick time frame to get something together and bring it back. And in that light also, I understand that the Transportation Committee is still putting things together because they're new, and is a formal review and recommendation out within that time frame realistic or not?
I can respond to that. I know that staff thinks the time frame is kind of tight, but I can also tell you that I think it's of sufficient importance that we need to do it. So I know it's aggressive, but I'll commit, and I put that date in there with the intent of meeting it because, like many things we do, they directly impact the safety of our neighborhoods and of our residents. So we're going to try like crazy to do a good job of review and to meet that deadline. We'll get it scheduled on the Transportation Commission's agenda and try and bring it back by that date because it's an important part of community safety.
Councilmember Frenzel, you still have the floor.
I'm great, thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I think that my colleague, Councilmember Warpahowski, makes some good points, but I'm going to be supporting this because I think it's always in our interest to go back and test and review things, even though I am an unequivocal supporter of our current crosswalk ordinance. I think we always have to be looking for best solutions, and we always have to be willing to take a critical look at things that we hold dear and important to see whether they are still the best way to do things. So I am comfortable with the timeline that the sponsors and the administration have been able to work out. Answering Councilmember Frenzel's questions, I believe that I can't speak for the Transportation Commission staff, but I can't imagine that based on our work plan, we can't squeeze this in there and provide a recommendation back to this body. And frankly, I'm encouraged to see, not only let's take a look at our current crosswalk ordinance, but let's also figure out a way to see how to make this situation better throughout the city for everybody and safer. And I think that that's what we should always be striving for. So I'm happy to vote for this.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. like Councilmember Smith, I think consistent reviews are important, but also like Councilmember Warpahowski, I would like reviews to lead to resolution and then to progress. And if this is a means to bring up 7 years' worth of work and study by citizen volunteers and our professional staff, have them redo it, which I think is appropriate, but then dismiss it once again. It seems like a waste of resources and a dismissal of respect for the people who dedicate their time to making our community safer. That said, I do think, with the best of intentions, this ordinance was passed in 2010 at a time when infrastructure couldn't keep up with it. And I think as we see bigger budgetary allotments given to pedestrian safety around flashing beacons, around gateway treatments, curb cuts, I think they're islands. I think this ordinance gains more effect and safer effect. And so I would like to, with the body's permission, add one bullet point to the resolve clause. I'm sorry, I don't know which resolve clause it is. The first one, that makes it easy. Just simply reviewing and summarizing infrastructure, or supplemental infrastructure to this ordinance as it exists to date. You would confuse Councilmember Eaton if you want to tweak wording. The intent is to provide the Transportation Commission and this body not only with a review of the ordinance by an accredited professional engineer, but also facilitate a discussion about the infrastructure we've implemented since the adoption of the ordinance and its appropriateness.
So I would point out that council rules ask that we amend resolutions in writing.
Yeah, I have.
Because, in fact, you have confused me. Did you send an amendment?
No.
Oh, okay.
I am about to, but if you were uncomfortable with the initial language, then I was giving you an opportunity to edit it before I sent it.
I'd like to see it.
Okay, fair enough. I'm a visual learner as well.
Are we waiting for the amendment?
You are. Sorry.
That's okay, take your time.
Can we get some music to fill these uncomfortable silences?
Is that you?
You bring your hair
Jackie, that's on its way. While the Jeopardy music plays, I appreciate Councilmember Smith as the liaison to the Transportation Commission's flexibility in working with a very tight timeline to get this back. I also do have a question for staff. With respect to the professional, while people read and ignore the answer to this question, with respect to the professional traffic engineer, is that, would we be looking in-house or looking to a consultant to review?
We have appropriately credentialed engineers as part of city staff, but I would take their guidance as to whether they thought a third set of eyes on it would be beneficial.
I appreciate that. Would we then, in the next 3 months, potentially see a budget amendment to, or not a budget amendment, but an allocation for those resources? Should we go with a private consultant?
Yeah, I think.
Has an in-house traffic engineer, a city employed traffic engineer not reviewed this to date?
We have not reviewed the ordinance in a holistic context that this resolution requests that we do. I would also, get back to your first question, I think if it's going to require a budget amendment, we're not going to be able to get this done within the time frame specified. So I don't know that I would anticipate that it being that costly an effort. And I'll share with you what staff has told me as we looked at the draft, is that they place traffic control devices appropriately in accordance with the warrants that are in the manual, but there's an interface between engineering practice and policy, and at times they're uncomfortable in addressing that, but they're going to have to look at it through that eye. And I think the engineer's eye in this case has a good way to determine where we're promoting safety and where we're putting things at risk. So I think that viewpoint of having the experience of working with it is valuable. I think taking periodic looks at practice is important, and I think this resolution asks us to do that. And if it comes down to where we can't do an adequate job within the time frame specified, we'll give you an interim report. But I don't think there's anything to be gained by padding the schedule, if you will, to provide more time when we should be encouraged to do this quickly.
I appreciate that answer. I guess I'd like to return to the amendment I've moved.
So the third, read the
Yeah.
amendment language, we'll get a second, we'll call it a day.
In the first resolved clause that reads that the Ann Arbor City Council directs the city administrator to take the following actions in reviewing section 10.148 of chapter 126 of title 10 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, skipping then to the third bullet point, which has now been added, which reads, review and summarize the infrastructure added since the adoption of the 2010 ordinance and its appropriateness.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Eaton. Discussion. Councilmember Westphal.
I appreciate what I think is the intent behind this particular addition. Is it expanding the scope many-fold? To me, it looks like it's asking for a review of every improvement made.
All that information already exists.
I think we provided reports on the where we put devices in as it relates to school safety, and I think that's been the majority of effort over the last year. So,
Yes.
so a lot of this will be taking that information and then maybe repackaging and then presenting it. I don't know that you're going to get, nor do we have the experience at this point to give you detailed analysis on effectiveness, but the word was appropriateness, and what we've installed is appropriate. So I think it's a chance to update that and some other things that are going on, and also be a little bit prospective and look forward.
So this is not a review of new crosswalk markings added since 2010 throughout the city, in every instance, and how far the stop bar is from the crosswalk, and where the signs are placed in every instance, et cetera.
I think it's reasonable to go back a reasonable time and say where we've installed new markings, where we've installed new signage. Because the configuration is all going to be, per the design standards that we have, so.
I have larger issues with the time commitment, so I just wanted to address this bullet point, but.
But what I hear, if I can key off, what I hear from staff saying is that the introduction of this bullet point would not alter the timeframe.
Or the amount required.
No, I think what it does is give you a sense of the amount of work that staff has done over the last several years to advance signs, marking, signals. So we'll talk about the beacons that have been put in. We can talk about where we've addressed markings and where we've done work.
It will not be much of a research project, if that's what your concern is. We'll merely go back to a certain date and pull our TCOs for, new TCOs for crosswalks, and that will tell us where we've modified something since the next date, so it will not be small, but it will not be a monumental research project.
And there's value in consolidating that information in one place to show the volume of effort that's been exerted and the value that's been obtained from the expenditure of city funds.
Perhaps I can insert, this sounds like it's going to be friendly. Is this amendment friendly?
Yeah.
Carry on. Councilman Rackham, you still have the floor.
Thank you. Like I said, I think this ordinance was adopted with the best of intentions and upheld with the best of intentions. But I think only in recent years and only in this fiscal year are we investing in the infrastructure necessary to allow for the education and the enforcement to be done in a safe environment. And I'm glad that this will be presented with the full context of that infrastructure.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you. I think there's some good things and some perhaps not good things in this resolution. Getting information on why ramps are removed and potential policy surrounding that is well-intentioned. My main concerns stem from the resources that will be required to delve into this, and so I guess that's the first question for staff, if they have a cost estimate or what will not be done by doing this in terms of moving safety forward. And secondly, maybe this is for staff or for the sponsors, is there some kind of inference about what should happen with enforcement in the meantime? Because this whole resolution has been framed repeatedly in the fact that people are unhappy being ticketed, and that it's inconsistent with state law, which those two things I disagree with, but it keeps getting framed in that context. So I guess for staff, what kind of resources are we talking about? What things are not going to get done to advance safety in the meantime? And is there any implication for enforcement in the meantime?
Craig, do you want to talk about the effort to put the information together?
Yeah, I looked at the listing of locations and why it seems fairly large the way it's written with the descriptions. It, again, will take some time, but it's not a monumental task, and we'll work through it. And I can't tell you exactly what won't get done, but it's not like something major is going to slide off the work schedule to do that.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And many of the locations, we've already been questioned by the public when the changes were already put in place, so.
If I can add, there's been enough concern raised that it is worth going through this effort to build consensus, review practice. And I think, and to give Mr. Eden some credit, he's been very patient as we've gone through the wording on this resolution, so that staff can be supportive of it, and it's something that we can achieve. So I think getting the data together, presenting it in a comprehensive way has value for the community who's interested. In terms of enforcement, I haven't spoken specifically with Chief Baird, but I'll share a thought, and that is pulling somebody over is about changing behavior. It's not necessarily giving a ticket. So what I care about is that your heart rate goes up for that 30 seconds in between the time you see the flashing lights and the police officer comes to you and explains to you what the ordinance is and what the behavior is. Issuing the ticket is, in my mind, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the police, but it's secondary to that notice of how to behave in this community. So I think police have always exercised discretion, tickets versus warnings, and I'll talk to Chief about what the best way to move forward, but we're always going to enforce the ordinances that are on the books.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, my understanding is that our state legislators have been lobbying for some advancement in the state law, and you know, much has been made about consistency. You know, there's lots of ways that Michigan, you know, Ann Arbor is inconsistent with, you know, township law, for example. So, you know, I think in a perfect world, we'd recognize that the whole state should accommodate and protect pedestrians and cyclists better. On this note, you know, the state doing the bare minimum to say, you know, you have to stop with for somebody only when they're have a foot in the right of way, I think is thoroughly unacceptable, and you know, and I hope we still require that drivers stop when somebody is on the edge, whether or not they are in a wheelchair or are just waiting at the edge of traffic and can't find a gap. So there's benefit in reviewing these policies, and they should be, but this keeps getting framed in a way that makes it appear that this is just a repeal part 2, and I thoroughly disagree with that, so I'm struggling with if this is the appropriate timing for this kind of discussion, and if it's putting more people in danger by saying that we're not committed to pedestrian safety.
Councilmember Craypole.
Yes, you know, I'm sitting on the fence too. I agree. I think it's important to review our ordinances on some type of systematic process, and I think we need to do it with all our ordinances at some point, to look through to make sure they're relevant to where we're actually at today versus at the time they were written. I would like to, after going through this though, to have it kind of put this to rest for at least a period of time until it's the next logical time to review it, depending, no matter what the outcome is, because I think the ultimate goal we all have is to build and may have a safer city for residents and visitors to the city, no matter what. My one concern was if there was going to be any impact on resources with the time frame, but I think that's been answered. I think any concern we have about other people in other states, other municipalities who don't have this ordinance, that doesn't really concern me. I don't know if anybody's ever lived in California. I guarantee probably your car here in Michigan's not going to meet their emission standards, and you can get ticketed time and time again until it does. Or there's a number of obscure ordinances in the city of Detroit or any other place that you can be ticketed for. So, and I think in the terms of this ordinance, I think it's something that we're a leader in, and we pull others forward to make them become safer cities and safer places for pedestrians, bikers, and those who use the roadways. So I will support this in terms of, I think, again, it's important to review our ordinances, and I think the additions recommended by Councilman Ackerman are good because it puts it in context of not where we were, but where we are and where we're going in terms of our crosswalk safety and improvements, and I think that's an important consideration as we move forward. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Orbachowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. If the city administrator supports and sees value in this process, sure, I'm on board. I will say that in terms of the desire for a state standard, I would not want to see that as the way that the state has so often pursued a uniform standard by preempting the ability of local units of government to set a higher standard. We've seen that with gun laws, we've seen that with fireworks laws, we've seen it with a lot with liquor laws. I don't want a state standard that lowers the standard and prevents local efforts to improve safety and to be the laboratory of democracy and safety there. As I looked back at the recommendations of the Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force, the recommendations which were unanimously accepted in 2015. One of the priority recommendations was to preserve the pedestrian crosswalk law. Another was regular enforcement of pedestrian crossing laws. And another was targeted enforcement aimed at improving the yield rates at crosswalk locations. The recommendations talked about using national best practices for this enforcement. The Federal Highway Safety Administration's document on how to develop a pedestrian safety action plan identifies pedestrian decoy operations as one of those best practices. So as I reviewed that literature, I was pleased to see that the action of council and the action of that pedestrian safety and access task force, their good work is being put into progress with this stepped up enforcement. And I want to thank City Administrator Lazarus, Chief Baird, and everybody who's helped move the ball forward on those recommendations.
Further discussion? Councilmember Lowe.
Just a thought, as this is being reviewed, if this passes, is there someone on the Transportation Commission who is connected to the automated driver systems universe? Because I think to have that set of eyes and know-how weigh in on this, because this whole issue of uniformity, I think, does intersect with that world, and I know that there are things that are moving rather quickly on that front, relatively speaking, and it seems that if we're going to take this step back to just assess this, that would also be a good persons to consult who could bring that kind of knowledge to the conversation.
So Mr. Dolan from U of M is on the commission.
Oh, okay.
But aside from that, Mr. Yupi works with Dr. Sayers up at Tree on the integration of self-driving autonomous
Excellent.
vehicles as well. So those relations are in place, they're ongoing. And, the research into interaction between self-driving vehicles and pedestrians is ongoing and is one of those things that's going to happen in order for autonomous vehicles to operate safely in the right-of-way. So we can bring what we're able to bring into the discussion within the time frame.
Excellent, thank you.
Councilmember Ackerman.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Councilmember Eaton.
Just as an aside, when I was in Lansing last Thursday, I attended a joint session of the House and Senate Transportation Committees, and they were given a presentation on autonomous vehicles. And it was pretty remarkable what they've had to do to get autonomous vehicles to accommodate a construction zone. Basically, they have to put a barcode on every object and person so that the autonomous vehicle recognizes what it's encountering. And so this is really an important consideration, because an autonomous vehicle needs to recognize when a person is just standing at a curb or when a person's standing at a curb at a crosswalk, and be able to differentiate those two things. So I think that's an important consideration. But I believe that will probably come through state regulation and not through our ordinance. Thank you.
Further discussion? I will be supporting the proposal. I'm glad to see that it'll be going to the Transportation Commission, and eager to hear staff's advice on their evaluation. I would like to make sure, however, that we are ourselves, that we maintain discipline on the terms of the ordinance itself. That the ordinance itself, because I think we play a role in continuing to educate the public on this. The ordinance itself refers to pedestrians stopped at the curb line, or ramp. It doesn't refer to a word that involves intent, such as waiting or wishing or intending to. It's stopped. So it is the ordinance, I think, was at the time carefully crafted so that the driver would not need to divine the goals of the pedestrian, but rather could merely observe the pedestrian. So the ordinance relates and requires drivers to yield to pedestrians stopped at the curb line, or ramp leading to a crosswalk. Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Westfall.
Councilmember Westfall?
No.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
No.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Crapel?
Yes.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Kalasapati?
Yes.
Councilmember Frenzel?
Yes.
Motion carries.
DB1, resolution to approve the gallery planned project site plan and development agreement, 441 South Ashley Street, moved by Councilor Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Warpahowski. Discussion, Councilmember Warpahowski.
I had a couple of quick questions for staff on this. The memo, and I apologize for not getting these in with the written questions. There was a note in the memo about the drive on West Jefferson not being compliant with city code. Has that been addressed?
Yes, I checked the engineering comments. It will be incumbent upon the petitioner to get a permit from the railroad company.
Okay. And the staff report indicated that the impacts to the sanitary sewer system are being modeled. Further information will be forthcoming. Have we gotten that information?
Yep, that's been completed.
Okay. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DB2, resolution to approve Hampton Inn Development Agreement Amendment Number 2901 Jackson Road, moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Crapel. Discussion, please, of DB2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. CA9, resolution to award a contract to the Davy Tree Expert Company for routine street tree pruning in the amount of $666,675, moved by Councilmember Westfall, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion, please. Councilmember Westfall.
Yeah, thank you for your indulgence, staff, on sticking around to
Carrie's
help
here.
help with this. If I could ask staff a couple questions about this. I'm fully cognizant, as much as I can be, not being in the field, of the benefits of our urban tree canopy and the importance of maintenance and pruning. I am a proud citizen pruner, certified, and out there as much as I can. I asked a couple questions effectively about the cost, and I appreciate that this was bid out and we got 3 qualified bidders, and this was close to the lowest bid. But it seems like there are no comparables for service like this recently or in peer cities. Is that true?
Yes, and Carrie Gray, our natural resources person that works with trees, is here, and she can answer in more detail.
So the last time we had a routine pruning cycle was, it completed in 2003. It was ended because of Emerald Ash Borer. So we don't have any from the city's perspective in terms of comparables. And within Michigan, there's not really any communities who are doing the type of pruning that we need to be done. Since it's been so long since we've had a routine pruning cycle, our trees need a lot more work than most communities' trees do, because it's just been so long since they were last touched. So, and I'm not sure if in the bid tab, but on average, so the average cost that it's going to cost to do the pruning is $151 per tree. So it's looking at trees basically from 2 inches up to basically 50 inches, and that's the average cost to prune a tree. So if you want to put it into context, it's about $330 to plant a tree a year. So to plant a tree and 1 year guarantee plus 12 waterings is $330 a year, and so this is on average going to cost us $151 to prune each of those trees.
That's really helpful. And I know back in the urban forestry management plan, routine pruning was called out as something that's more appropriate for contractors. And does that mean at any price, effectively? Or because I understand why it's kind of seasonal work, and but I guess my question had to do with at what point does it make sense to invest in staff and equipment to continue this, because presumably we're going to want to do this onward.
Even when we were doing pruning prior to 2003, 2004, we were using contractors to do a lot of that work already. So this is following what we have done before. And by using contractors, you can follow the ebb and flow of the work without having the issue of what you do with the employees when there is not that work to be done, or there is not the financials to continue with the program at whatever level you set it at. And we would also have to make capital investments to provide the equipment for staff to do that work.
So I would add that when you look at that kind of work that is highly repetitive, is best to do by contract because you can schedule it. Work that is unique in nature is best to do by staff because it's a non-recurring nature and you don't pay as much for on-call or specialized skills. So I think we would be hard-pressed to beat the price that we would get by bidding it out.
And staff is doing an area, so there are some staff doing some of the pruning in one of the areas, but for the most part, they're basically contracted out for the pruning.
Great, and it was, and in the caucus questions, it was helpful to know that this will be closely monitored. It sounds like the
Correct.
when a contractor's highly qualified, you know, I'm sure they'll have turnover in their staff and so on, but yeah, I think it's a worthy investment. I'm just, given the fact that we don't have many comparables from peer communities, and I was unsure about at what point does it justify investing our own equipment. That's helpful, and this is just for 1 year. That's correct, the six
Yes, this is the first year of the pruning cycle, so this is just the one-year contract.
Great. All right, thanks so much.
Further discussion? I guess, since we're here and talking about it and it's off the consent agenda, I just got to say how delighted I am that this is moving forward. The street tree program is something I think that we all should be something about which we should all be very proud. The residents, love the trees. The trees do great work for neighborhoods, for communities, for stormwater, air quality. It's a triple win, quadruple win? It's a lot of wins. And it's the sort of thing that we have regrettably not been able to provide our residents. And now through funding associated with the stormwater, identifying and sourcing the tree's material stormwater benefit, we're able to do so, and it's just great. So thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. Do we have communications today from our city attorney?
No, Mayor.
We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I have a motion, please, to approve the clerk's report, moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Crapel. Discussion, please, of the clerk's report. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
Good evening, Kathy Griswold. Last week I mentioned that Congresswoman Debbie Dingell was backing a bill regarding self-driving cars. I'd like to announce that on Wednesday of last week, it passed unanimously in the House, so it had bipartisan support. And from her press release, she states, driverless technology is going to be developed whether we like it or not, and the question before us is whether the United States is going to be the international leader in the area. Ann Arbor has the opportunity to be the leader in terms of autonomous vehicles and the pedestrian interface. Many years ago, I worked in the computer industry, and there were many companies that got involved in what was then called a personal computer, the desktop computer, and the engineers were really excited about all the technology, but they didn't have time for the user interface. And then along came Apple. We can do the same thing, but Ann Arbor has got to be the leader. Councilmember Jack Eaton and I attended a joint meeting last week. I will be returning to Lansing tomorrow. We have to have a uniform law that is compatible with autonomous vehicles, and I am confident that the Republicans in Lansing are going to make this happen because it's good for business and it will also be safe for pedestrians. The only other thing I'd like to say is that I have complete confidence in our professional engineers on staff, and I have mentioned that many, many times, but I'd like to say it one more time. We don't need to go outside. We have very capable people working on staff, and we simply need to listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment?
Is it fair for me to take a minute?
Sure, yeah.
Just that. I want to thank you for your serious attention to the suicide problem. My feeling is that probably those of you from the Third Ward were much more directly affected by this. I don't think I knew the family. But it's an important issue. I did have some conversations afterwards with Susan Polly, and I gave her some of the particulars about that pricing suggestion that I got this morning from an Ann Arbor fencing company, or Ann Arbor area fencing company. And she's going to look into it. I hope that doesn't mean she's going to start a whole new round of y'all come and bid, and might just go over there and say, hey, if you can do a lot better than the low bid we've already got. And I'm not familiar with the legalities of that sort of thing, but I think we've played out the national thing. And these people can start in November and would have at least through the middle of December to do some serious work, maybe not the whole job. And then they stop for winter. So it's pretty urgent that if they're to do that, it be done. And I will just say, you've been so nice that I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to look at my autographed copy of The Art of the Deal by the man who wrote it, which I obtained yesterday. So when the meeting's over, I'll let you see it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ed Vilmetti. I don't go to a lot of meetings, as many as council members go to, but I try to pick out the least well-attended meetings on the city calendar, the least well-publicized, the least well-noticed, and the ones that I know the least about, because it's probably the most interesting. So I looked at, over the weekend, looked at the Legistar for this week, and there were 16 different meetings on the calendar. One was a DDA meeting that didn't have its meeting details published on the city calendar, but I knew where to get those. Of the rest, I noticed 4 that had no meeting details at all. And so I sent a note to the city clerk asking for updates on those. I got back 2 cases where the lack of meeting agendas was an oversight, and those were corrected promptly. One where the meeting was intended to have meeting details published in advance, but only, it was a Thursday meeting, so I only was to expect it on Tuesday. And then the last of those was the Council Administration Committee, which meets at in the late afternoon before the council itself meets. And it was not told that a meeting agenda would be available for that. So I figure here's a small committee, no agenda. I've asked for minutes before, and minutes have been slow to come. Minutes for a while were written in longhand. So what better way to spend a 4 p.m. on a Monday afternoon than to go visit an unfamiliar committee? And I came away impressed. The city administrator briefed council on not only elements of this week's agenda, but also future agendas. There's about 3 months worth of planning going on this thing. Some discussion of whether elements would be appropriate for the agenda soon or later. So I really recommend to anyone who is watching City Council closely that they schedule a little bit of time, even if they don't get an agenda for the Council Administration Committee, that it's a rip-roaring good time. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn some things that won't be evident from coming to this meeting. It meets in a very small room, so you'll be able to see what goes on closely. I'm sure they would adjourn to a bigger room if the thundering herds of the public came upon them, but that seems unlikely. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak in public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Are there communications today from council? Do we have a closed session today?
Yes, we do, Mayor. We have a closed session tonight on pending litigation, and that is under the OMA, and it's set forth specifically to go into closed session. So with your indulgence, yes.
May I have a motion, please, to go into closed session? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Crapo. Discussion. Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Westfall.
Councilmember Westfall?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum? Yes. Councilmember Grand? Yes. Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Crapo?
Yes.
Councilmember Warpowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Kalasapati? Yes. Councilmember Frenzel?
Oh, my, yes.
Motion carries.
We are in closed session.
Given the enthusiastic vote, yes.
back in open session. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Lum, second by Councilmember Kalasapathy. To discussion. All in favor? Aye. Or opposed? We are adjourned.